This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of Protego by Imparfait, composed by Burning Aurora, Kaliana, and Flowerhawk. April 1977. Chapter 1, Sirius. Mooney puts the final touches on the Marauders map the day after they return to school from spring holidays. Sirius can't believe it's actually finished. Wormtail might never recover from the sheer number of girls' bathrooms he's been in. James and Sirius spent so much of the last 2 years under the invisibility cloak. Sometimes Sirius finds himself forgetting that he isn't actually invisible when he's walking along the halls. Remus is downright traumatized by the hundreds of hours he's spent carefully copying their poorly drawn scrap paper diagrams and turning them into an actual 2-scale map. They watch with a kind of reverence as Remus unfolds it one last time and adds the room at the very top of the divination spire, which Peter found the night before they left for break, because he felt a draft while trying to get a grope in on Helen Roper.
And they say Hogwarts is unplottable,
James says as Remus blows on the ink very carefully to dry it.
It is.
Sirius tells him again, for what has to be the 10,000th time since the extracurricular cartography project began.
You just don't know what unplottable means.
It's a bit useless as a thing.
Peter muses aloud.
We know where everything is already. I mean, we've found it all.
Pettigrew,
Remus says irritably.
I will strangle you. I've given myself migraines trying to figure out your drawings. I have done damage to my wrist I will never recover from. And I haven't done it for nothing. It's beautiful. It's a masterpiece. Map making is awful. Let's never do it again.
Do you think...
Sirius starts, but Remus whips his head around to level an absolutely murderous stare at him that makes Sirius clamp a hand over his own mouth to stop himself from speaking any further. James, however, can sometimes read his mind. His whole face lights up.
Oh, I do think Padfoot.
He says.
Think what?
Remus asks, voice flat.
Well, Wormtail's right, it's a bit useless. What do we need a map for?
He does some sort of flourishing thing with his hands that Sirius finds rather funny looking.
Sneaking around, obviously. And where we are isn't as important as who we're near.
That's...
Remus pauses and bites down on his lip, thinking.
Actually, that's quite good.
Yes.
Sirius says, muffled by his own hand. He pulls it away.
There's got to be a way to see where everyone is. I mean, a tracking charm or library.
He gasps.
I need a library.
He takes off running before anyone can stop him, tearing his way through the common room and down a dozen flights of stairs before the idea even finishes fleshing itself out in his head. Pince looks startled to see him as he rushes into the library dressed in just his pajamas and his slippers. In his excitement about the idea, he'd forgotten to even grab a robe.
Hello,
he says as he comes up to the circulation desk.
I'm going to study.
She peers suspiciously at him.
Study.
She repeats.
Holidays ended yesterday.
He nods.
Lots of charms work to catch up on.
He tells her.
Didn't do anything over break. Very busy with pranks and things. Or whatever James and I get up to when we're elsewhere.
He backs away towards the stacks, trying not to look her in the eyes. He's off kilter. Pince usually tilts more toward fond annoyance than suspicion with him.
I've gotten some new stock in the literature section over the holiday,
she says, which is unfortunately tempting. Sirius does love a pleasure read, which she knows perhaps better than anyone. He tore through most of the Muggle literature section last term in a fit of bookishness that he blamed entirely on Hope Lupin. He stops, unable to help himself.
Wizard or Muggle?
He asks because there's no harm in checking out a few books for himself, too.
Both.
She answers, too smug for Sirius's liking.
This is a distraction technique,
he says.
I want it known that I know.
I'm sure your charms work can wait until you actually have some.
He throws up his hands.
We've barely even gotten up to anything this year, you know. I really am looking for a book on charms. Tracing charms or tracking charms or how those family clocks work. Very interesting things, you know.
Yes, I'm sure you aren't trying to do anything mischievous at all.
She closes her ledger and peers at him through narrowed eyes, still suspicious.
As I'm sure all of those animadry books you took out 2 years ago were for a transfiguration assignment.
He makes a face, his cheeks heat.
Does everyone know?
Well, it's a public record. And we talk in the staff lounge, you know, we aren't silently living in this castle together.
She sighs.
Tell me it isn't for anything nefarious, Mr. Black, and I'll tell you where to look. I'll even tell you the title.
Animadry isn't nefarious,
He's put out by that. Padfoot is a very good dog.
and I'm not doing nefarious things this year.
6 months ago, you set Mr. Snape on fire.
6 months ago, Snape deserved it.
He tells her with more conviction than it probably deserves. He can't even remember why he did it, but he's certain Snivellus earned it. He doesn't go setting people on fire for nothing. Well, not anymore, at least. He takes a step backward toward the stacks again, doing his best pleading eyes. She considers him for another moment and then lets out a sigh.
Go.
She says,
In the magical mechanics section, second shelf from the bottom, charming your footsteps.
He grins, big and toothy.
Thank you, Madam Pince. You're the best librarian I know.
I'm aware that I'm the only one you know, Mr. Black.
She points at the clock.
30 minutes, and if you see Miss Evans, remind her of the time for me.
He takes off down the applied transfiguration aisle and hooks left toward the charms section, opting to not wander right to look at the new novels Pince brought in, which is a hard choice for him. He came here with a purpose, and if he can find what he's looking for in charming your footsteps, they can put an end to the extracurricular cartography project. Finally, after 2 long, exhausting years. He skirts around potions. There's always the off chance Snivellus is there, sniveling amongst the stacks, and takes a right through defensive theory toward the back rows of stacks where magical mechanics is shelved, nestled between physical charming and natural magic. Sirius finds Evans asleep at a study table between defensive theory and magical creatures. Her quill still in her hand, her head pillowed on a book. He shakes his head, laughing to himself, because of course Evans is actually studying the night after break ends. He goes to shake her and eyes her notes. She's not studying. Her penmanship is awful. She's no good with a quill, but he can make out scarring on the torso and curse side effect, and he doesn't have to look any further. He considers torching her notes, but unless he's going to obliviate her, all that would do is waste some parchment.
Evans,
He says, probably too softly to wake her. She shifts in her sleep. He scrubs at the bridge of his nose, annoyed by her and this and the entire wizarding world for just a moment. He pokes her in the shoulder.
Evans.
He repeats louder. She startles awake, eyelids fluttering, and she peers up at him.
Sirius.
I've been told to remind you of the time. It's almost 9.
She struggles up off the table, blinking tiredly down at her notes. Her cheeks pink, and she slams the book closed over the parchment.
Thank you.
She says. She looks guilty. Good, he thinks. He crosses his arms over his chest.
It's none of your business.
He snaps at her before he can stop himself.
Stop looking. You're nothing.
Sirius interrupts. He takes a deep breath, pushing back against the tight feeling of anxiety in his chest. Too many people know already. All of them are his fault, one way or another. Even this. She came looking for him that morning, after all. She sighs and covers her face with her hands.
I'm sorry.
She mumbles.
He's my friend and I'm worried about him.
He's fine.
Sirius tells her. He'll give her this kindness and only this. It won't be enough to stop her, but he can hold on to a shred of hope.
I wouldn't lie about that.
No, you wouldn't.
She agrees.
I'm sorry, Sirius.
He turns away from her, back towards magical mechanics, but thinks better of it and spins back to face her. This is his fault. He has to fix it.
They embarrass him, Evans.
He tells her.
He hates people seeing them. He hates me seeing them. Don't pry. Please, just let it go.
He stalks away to magical mechanics before Lily can say another word to him. Sirius finds the book, wedged between Charming Clockwork and an Encyclopedia of Housekeeping Charms, 3rd edition. It's a hollow victory. The excitement at the idea has fizzled away, replaced by anxiety and the lingering shadow of that old, awful thought that he's the worst thing to happen to Remus Lupin since Fenrir Greyback. Pince slips him a Bradbury book when he goes back to the circulation desk to check it out. Even that can't lift the storm cloud from inside his head. Spiraling, McGonagall calls it. Remus probably does too, although not to him. He can't go back to the tower. Remus will take one look at him and see right through him, ask him what happened, and Sirius won't be able to lie to him. He closes his eyes and leans against the wall by the library doors, chest feeling tight. He can't lie to him, and he'll say it's my fault, and Remus will tell him it isn't, but he'll... One breath in, one out, calming himself again, pull up. No, he thinks. Push down. It's cowardly and it's hiding, but he knows it works. He shoves the books into his trouser pocket, then he pushes Sirius down. Padfoot's magic comes up and up, flashing out, and the world fades to muted tones, and his thoughts are small and narrow. Padfoot's a good dog and a hiding place, and Sirius can't think in spirals anymore. He slinks away, sulking in the shadows, and goes where he always goes when he feels like this. Padfoot sits outside McGonagall's door for a long time, ages for a dog who's also a man with famously poor self-control, but he doesn't paw at it. It's late. She's still cross at Sirius for being Padfoot. She's cross at him for a lot of things, all the time, and he's been bothering her too much this year. He's getting better. He can get himself out of this one. There's a nice space behind a suit of armor at the end of the hall. He lays down, curled into a ball. He'll stay here for a while, just until he thinks the feeling will fade, and he'll be okay again as a man instead of a dog. And then he'll go back to the tower and climb into bed and put his arms around Moony and fall asleep. He'll just lay there for a while, close but not a bother. Padfoot's a good dog, and McGonagall is cross. He feels strange to be laying there just out where anyone can find him. Padfoot's been his last secret for so long. His thoughts start to slip, more dog than man, and he thinks about pine trees and grass and vanilla as he tumbles over into sleep. He's having a pleasant dream, the doggish sort of good, where he's snuffling through nice-smelling flowers, chasing rabbits, and getting head scritches from some unknown hand. The human part of him that's always hovering knows it's Remus, but the thought is thin and lost in the blurry sepia tones of dreams. He's startled awake by a real hand on his real head, scratching the place behind his ears that feels the best. It's James, all leather fire pine brother, crouched down beside him, looking sad-eyed behind his glasses. Padfoot pulls away and curls up tighter into a smaller ball.
You were supposed to go to the library.
James says to him. He sits on the floor, leaning up against the wall next to him. Padfoot whines. He can see sunlight creeping across the floor of the fifth-floor corridor he called a bedroom last night. It's morning. He didn't mean to be gone for so long. James huffs at him.
You aren't a great conversationalist like this, you know.
He reaches back out and tugs gently on one of Padfoot's ears.
I can't tell you you're wrong if I don't know what happened.
Padfoot leans into James's hand. He should change back, but he doesn't want to. He isn't sure if the feeling has passed yet. He can't tell what he'll feel as a man when he's like this. Padfoot wants pats and head rubs and crunchy bacon. Sirius's needs are more complex, like assurance and absolution.
Do you want Moony?
James asks. Padfoot gives a little soft woof. He does, actually. He wants to smell Moony's parchment vanilla rain has best smell. He wants Moony to curl around him and to get soft reassurances whispered into his fur. Moony gives the best pets of all of Padfoot's friends.
You should change back for now,
James says. He curls his fingers into Padfoot's fur, and the tug is nice, it's soothing.
It's almost breakfast. People will be up.
Padfoot isn't a secret anymore, but Sirius doesn't want the stairs, so Sirius pulls himself back up from where he's buried inside his own core, pushing Padfoot down and down and down, and he's a man again in a single heartbeat. James takes his hand away from Sirius's back and lets him gather himself up off the floor.
It doesn't matter.
Sirius tells him. He doesn't sound as terrible as he thought he might.
Even Pince knows.
Well, that's the professor's.
He says, waving off Sirius's worry.
I don't think Mulciber and Crouch have an academic interest in the Animagus registry.
Sirius pokes at his own feelings as he gets to his feet. The disastrous pity party inside of him is mostly gone, just lingering cobwebs clogging up his thoughts. He stuffs his hands into his pockets. His knuckles knock against the two thin books he shoved in his pocket last night before he transformed.
Evans was in the library last night.
James lets out a noise that is so disturbingly smitten. Sirius deeply hopes he never looks or sounds like that. He thinks back to fourth year, when his crush on Remus was at its fever pitch before it turned into reality. Even then, he doesn't think he looked like that.
She's a very studious woman.
James says.
She was making notes about magical scars.
James does a passable job of masking whatever thing he's thinking. Sirius thinks he might be rubbing off on him in the worst way. It's very black, shuddering feelings behind blank eyes. He doesn't like seeing it on James's face.
Is that what this was about?
James gets to his feet and stands in front of Sirius.
You think that's your fault?
I know it is.
Sirius tells him.
She wouldn't have seen if she didn't come looking for me.
Well, then it's my fault.
James crosses his arms, tapping his fingers against his own elbow.
She came looking for you to talk about me.
It's not.
And my point, thank you.
James ducks his head down, peering up at Sirius with kind eyes.
It's no one's fault, you daft fucker. Mooney's allowed to sleep without being covered up from head to toe like a Victorian grandmum. He's allowed to sleep with his whole arse out if he wants to. Lily couldn't have known there was a secret to stumble in on, because it's a secret.
She's going to figure it out.
Sirius hates this, but it's true. Evans is too curious to stop and too smart to be fooled. James sighs again and shakes his head.
She's not going to be the only one to figure it out, Sirius.
He says,
You have to get used to this. I'm sorry, but you do. Peter and I aren't going to be the only people you know for the next 90 years, and some of those people will figure out Mooney's secret because you aren't going to be friends with empty-headed nitwits.
He knows James is right. That doesn't make him feel better.
Maybe we'll move to Siberia.
You wouldn't last 5 minutes in Siberia.
I could. I'd have Mooney for warmth. He'd learn Russian so I wouldn't have to.
James has a fond look on his face.
You wouldn't last 5 minutes.
He says again,
I wouldn't let you. I'd come bursting through your fireplace and drag you both home by the ears.
Home. Rosewood House, where he lives with his mum and his dad and his brother, where Mooney is welcome and loved too, and no one bats an eye at his scars or mentions the oddly thick vanilla smell from his lotion that follows him around for a week after every full moon. Sirius wishes he were at home right now, on the sofa with Mum, listening to her hum along to the phonograph while she does her embroidery. It's been hitting him like that, out of nowhere and from nothing special, all week. Home, which he has again, or maybe has for the first time. He isn't just staying with the Potters, he's a Potter now, too. He'll be the odd curiosity on the tapestry, the second son born first, but he'll never be a charred burn mark on the Potter's pear tree. James's great-great-grandchildren will look at it, and they won't think there's Sirius Black. They'll think that was Sirius Potter, and he married Remus Lupin. He doesn't want to run away again. He wants to stay here, with his family and his fiancée, and some people will find out the secret, and he has to be okay with that. He'll keep Remus safe. That's what will count at the end, when he's standing at the crossroads of forever.
Want to skip defense and go take a run in the forest?
James asks him. He does. Quite a lot. Sirius looks back toward the stairs that would lead him back to Gryffindor Tower.
Mooney's probably worried.
I told him I'd find you.
James says,
He knows you wander off sometimes.
Well, sure, but you haven't told him I've been found. I could have been strung up by Filch or eaten by something terrible.
He levels the sagest look he can muster at James.
One day, when you've got a fiancée, you'll understand.
James gags at him, but he tosses an arm around Sirius's shoulders, leading him toward the stairs.
We'll tell Mooney you're okay, and then skip defense and go take a run.
That'll do the trick to clear the rest of the cobwebs in his head, Sirius thinks, as he hops over a trick step with James at his heels. Some light truancy, but first Mooney. Chapter 2, James. He doesn't expect a summons from McGonagall on Thursday night. It comes from Luca Fallow, a third year, who stutters and sweats and can barely get the words out as though he's speaking to a celebrity, which James understands he might be to the kid, but it's still strange. McGonagall sending a third year to call him to her office is not her usual method, which tends to be more grabbing him by the ear and marching him down the hall while shouting at him. James goes because James is sometimes goofy, but he isn't ever stupid, and certainly not stupid enough to ignore his head of house. He knocks, and the door opens under his knuckles. She's at her desk. There's no tea. James never gets tea. Sirius gets tea. Remus gets tea. James gets pursed lips and furrowed brows.
Professor.
Potter, come in. I see Fallow found you.
He perches in her red wingback chair and eyes her warily.
I was in the common room.
He tells her.
We haven't done anything.
She levels a look on him that makes him puff out all his breath. Furious doesn't begin to cover it.
Are you sure about that, Prongs?
She asks. James starts to sweat.
I'm sure.
He says, doing his best to keep his voice level.
We did the pumpkins at Halloween, but that's the last real bit of mischief. Sirius has gone all bookish. It's boring.
Cracking when his dad asked him, that's one thing. Breaking under McGonagall's hard stare, that's another thing entirely. He won't. He'll tell her his favorite lie, that Prongs is a joke about his cock, and isn't that hilarious? She lifts her wand. James watches it, morbidly curious if she'd actually do it, if she'd force him to transform in her office. Prongs is big. He can and does check the wolf when he gets rowdy. He'd break the chair at the least, fill the cramped space with his bulk. Prongs is huge and majestic and a crime, so he won't do it if she doesn't force him. McGonagall doesn't cast anything. She does keep her wand loose in her fingers while she talks. James knows it's a vague threat. It might have worked if she was trying to coerce anything else out of him, but this...
I'm many things, Potter, but I'm not a fool.
I would never think that, Professor.
He tries a grin, but she levels a glare at him.
You're the smartest woman I know.
Bartering me up will get you absolutely nowhere, you know.
He sighs and runs his hands through his hair, trying to collect himself. He won't be able to outsmart her. He can lie to her, and he will, until he's blue in the face and 100 years old, and then he'll still lie to her in the afterlife. No, Professor, I've never been a dear, not once in my life. She can't keep him in the office forever. Eventually, she'll let him out to win the Quidditch Cup, because there's a game against Slytherin in 2 weeks. McGonagall finds Slytherins distasteful and Horace Slughorn contemptible, and she'd never let her captain miss the game. Sirius would snatch the armband from his locker. It would be pure chaos, and they might still win because Hammerhead is a hell of a seeker, but they'd probably get disqualified long before she got the chance to cite the snitch. 2 weeks is a long time, and he's supposed to go to Hogsmeade with Lily on Saturday. He can't stay locked in a staring contest for 2 weeks. So he does what he does best, and he schemes up a diversion, one which has the advantage of being both true and something he desperately needs answers about.
Sirius told me what happened last October.
James says. The words are rotten silver and green on his tongue. McGonagall drops her wand to the desk.
He told you.
I didn't know he was so.
James chews on his lip.
I knew he wanted to die. I just didn't think he'd gotten to the point of writing letters.
McGonagall's face is pale now, anger gone and replaced by something that's more distressed than anything else. He looks away from her because there's something there he doesn't want to see. There's blank places in what he knows. Sirius wrote a letter. Remus found it. Remus found Sirius, brought him to the hospital wing. There's a step missing. There's something in the middle. James doesn't know. McGonagall does, Remus does, Sirius does. They get tea.
He actually tried, didn't he?
It isn't a question.
Remus didn't stop him.
McGonagall doesn't answer, which is an answer in and of itself. James wants to rip something apart. He wants to punch Lyle Lupin in the head 16 more times. He wants to hex Walburga Black's tongue out her mouth. He wants to wrap Sirius in a Protego and sit on his chest and make him listen to the 10,000 reasons why James loves him. He feels impotent because this is all history now, and Sirius doesn't look like he's made of glass anymore. He doesn't spend every night curled up as Padfoot staring out at nothing with Remus clutching him like he'd die if he didn't. Maybe he would have. The thought makes him sick.
How?
He can't hardly think the words.
How close was it?
He hears the clink of china on china and turns, wide-eyed, and looks down at the teacup steaming on the edge of her desk.
Have some tea, Potter,
She says. He reaches for it, stops, looks up at her face and her sad eyes.
I'm a stag.
He says, and he takes the tea. He returns to Gryffindor Tower feeling nauseous. The curtains around Sirius's bed are hexed closed, which means they're shagging, and shagging means Sirius isn't dead, isn't gone, is okay. James shakes the thoughts out. He thinks of the tea. He thinks of McGonagall, telling him about negative self-talk and recovery, but never saying the actual words that are in his head like a chant. He can't stop thinking about it. He wants to rip something to pieces. He wants to cry. There's no one he can talk to about this, not even Sirius, because Sirius didn't tell him, his own fucking brother, his own best friend. He reminds himself to breathe. It's history. Recovery, McGonagall said. Looking forward is good, she said. Sirius is. He's doing those things. He's going to make an honest man of their prefect. He wants to go to Oxford. He's going to be a healer. The best damn healer Britain has ever seen. James is sure of that. He's going to buy a house in Wales so Remus can be near his mum, and they're going to one day give him a niece or a nephew or both. It'll happen. He can see it. It's the future. He isn't a seer, but he can see it anyway. James Potter is panicking. He recognizes it. His chest feels tight and his head feels woozy, but Sirius's curtains are hexed closed and he's going to go to Oxford and he isn't going to die until he's 150. Peter opens the door. James sees him take in James staring at Sirius's bed and raises an eyebrow.
That's incest now, isn't it?
He asks. James whips around to fully face him.
Fuck off, Pettigrew. I'm having a crisis.
It's a bit late to try for Padfoot.
He cocks his head to the side, trying to look serious, but his eyes give him away.
Remus will break your arms.
Maybe I'm mooning over Mooney, you sick fuck.
James snaps. He considers it, turns a little green.
Or neither. Godric, neither.
There we go.
Peter pats his back.
Leave them be. There's pumpkin pasties in the common room. Evans is down there. She might even give you a hug if you try.
James shoves at Peter's shoulder, gently, because he isn't mad at him, shows what Wormtail knows. Lily gave him a kiss, low on his cheek, practically on his mouth, at King's Cross when she saw him.
McGonagall knows about us.
Peter stills.
Us.
Prongs and Wormtail. Well, she didn't outright ask me about you, but the implication was clear. She called me Prongs.
3 years in Azkaban sounds rotten.
Peter licks his lips, nervous. His nose twitches. That's all Wormtail bubbling over onto his human face. James wonders if he's got prongsy bits too. Sirius likes to be touched more now that he's Padfoot. Sirius, who isn't dead. He presses a hand to his chest and takes in a breath.
If you get called to her office, be prepared.
James tells him.
Misdirection, channel your inner Slytherin.
I haven't got an inner Slytherin.
James does. James feels rotten about that too.
Channel mine then.
He says. He doesn't see Sirius before dinner. James considers waiting for him at the bottom of the stairs to the dormitory, standing there with his arms crossed and his best disappointed look on his face. But Lily and Peter drag him to the Great Hall. They don't know what he knows. They can't be terrified and angry and cracked open. Sirius is grinning when he comes into the Great Hall, hair still damp from a shower, in the plain black robe he wears at the hospital wing. No house affiliation amongst healers. James remembers it's Thursday and Sirius will be gone from dinner until after lights out, tending to snot-nosed second years who hex their own balls off.
Pork pies.
Sirius exclaims, happy sparkle in his eyes as he throws himself down in the space next to James on the bench. James feels unhinged because he can't stop thinking he's not dead over and over, and here's Sirius acting as though nothing is wrong at all. Sirius was gone from the dorm for 16 days and 75. James assumed they were all lakeside. How many of them were in hospital? How did they keep this from him? How did he not notice? Sirius gives him a funny look.
All right, Prongs.
James shakes his head.
McGonagall,
He says. He chokes down the rest of what he wants to say, which is told me your fucking secrets because it's horrible and not true. McGonagall never told him anything. No confirmation or denial, just silence. But the silence was enough. She gave him tea.
Quidditch.
Sirius asks him. He glances up as Remus comes through the open doors, herding 3 first years in front of him. He looks besotted and happy, and he scoots over to make space beside him.
our independent study.
James tries to keep his voice down.
She called me Prongs.
Sirius flicks his eyes to him.
She's not an idiot.
She told me that too.
James looks up at the ceiling. He can't look at Padfoot's face anymore, not right now.
I suppose it isn't a leap.
Certainly just a tiny hop from me to you.
Sirius agrees as Remus throws himself on the bench next to him, exasperatedly cursing under his breath about first years.
Peter.
I can only assume he's next, if she's guessed about the nicknames.
Sirius shrugs.
Peter's a stretch.
James swats him on the hand. He's warm and alive.
Don't be mean to Peter.
I'm not being mean to Peter. I'm being honest about Peter.
Sirius looks at him again, eyes sharp.
You could have come with me, you know.
James knows. He didn't want to. He still doesn't. Not even with McGonagall knowing, too. She won't send him to the Dementors. He's safe. Sirius wasn't. He is now because of that piece of parchment Dad framed and hung in his study. James doesn't need it. He hasn't got a boyfriend with an angry father. He wonders if Lily's dad would try to send him to prison. He doesn't think so. Not from the way Padfoot described him during winter holidays. Sirius turns away from him towards Remus for a kiss, and for a moment, a single flashing second, James is murderously jealous. James used to be Sirius's secret keeper, the one he whispered to in the middle of the night, and now Remus knows things and James doesn't, and James could hex him. He could knock Mooney out flat, and he'd deserve it.
I've done it, lads.
Peter says as he slides onto the bench across from James.
Helen Roper has been dumped.
Remus laughs and pulls back from Sirius, straightening himself and reaching for a roll.
You're going to get a reputation.
He tells Peter.
One of us ought to.
Sirius says.
Salacious rumours are the crumbs we can feed the peasantry.
You sound like Regulus.
Peter has the good sense to duck, and Sirius's hex fizzles out in the space between tables. It was half-hearted.
Regulus is a tryhard.
Sirius replies.
I've never tried hard at anything in my life.
Remus snickers and flicks at Sirius's ear.
That's a lie.
He says.
Well, aside from that,
Sirius amends. He grins, lovesick and dopey, and leans in for another kiss. Peter kicks him under the table, and James looks up.
I wasn't being serious before, but I might be now.
Peter says.
You're glaring, mate.
James shakes his head.
Still not.
He promises. Because he doesn't want to kiss Padfoot or Mooney, but he doesn't want to be left out of important world-shaking things. His best friend loves his brother, and they aren't telling him things that matter. They're quiet while they eat. James stews, Sirius eats his pork pie, and Remus gets harangued by McKinnon for help with defense homework. Peter watches him and watches Sirius and keeps sending James concerned looks that James will deal with later in private. Eventually, Sirius's alarm charm goes off and he wipes his mouth, kisses Remus again, and stands up.
That's me off.
He says,
I'll be back by 10.
I'll send a search party if you aren't.
Remus says, tilting his head back to look up at Sirius standing behind him.
10, that's a promise. Fluff my pillow for me.
James huffs.
You spent all afternoon shagging. Do you really need to go for round 4?
Peter's head snaps up. Remus turns slowly toward him, confusion all over his face. Sirius crosses his arms. The amusement in his eyes is gone, replaced by the wary beginnings of something like anger.
I don't think it concerns you at all what goes on behind my bed curtains,
he says. James rolls his eyes and turns back to his dinner plate. He's done eating. He's done with the Great Hall. Maybe he'll go out to the pitch and fly off some of the anger he's feeling. James tosses his napkin and pushes himself up from the bench. He's out of the Great Hall before he realizes Remus is following behind him.
James?
Remus calls after him. He does not want to talk to Remus Lupin. He might never want to talk to him again. James hasn't decided yet, because Remus knew and didn't tell him. Remus knew for 18 months and let James walk around not knowing like an idiot. James makes it another 100 feet before Remus catches him and grabs for his arm. James wheels around, fury all over his face.
Fuck off, Lupin.
He says. Remus recoils like he's been hit.
James, what the hell is wrong with you?
He asks, softer than James expected. He doesn't answer. He stalks forward toward the courtyard arch that leads to the path to the Quidditch pitch. He mapped this with Sirius. They counted their steps. Last year, in January, when Sirius still had dark smudges under his eyes, and James thought they were just because Orion torched his clean sweep, but Remus knew the real reason why and hadn't told him, had kept that from him like he didn't matter at all. He's angry. He's angrier than maybe he's ever been at Remus. James can't think of another time he's wanted to hex him, and it's so overwhelming his fingers twitch toward his wand. Remus catches him again, grabs him by the shoulder, and wheels him around to face him.
Stop running.
He says,
McGonagall.
Oh, fuck off already.
James shouts at him and he pulls his wand.
Go choke on Padfoot's dick. It's all you're good for anyway.
He sees a flicker of fear in Remus's eyes before anger blooms across his face, and he punches James hard in the stomach. James doubles over, wheezing.
Put your wand away.
Remus says. It's an order, prefect voice and all.
If you want to fight, we can fight, but we'll fight fair.
James rights himself and lifts his wand again. He skids back across the floor on his arse before he can even take in a breath.
Prongs, I said, put your wand away.
Remus is clutching his own in a white-knuckled grip. James didn't even see him go for it. Remus is terrifying. He thinks absently as he struggles up to his feet, a tower of anger that James has seen before but never directed at him. He'll lose a duel. James knows this. Remus is faster than him, knows him too well, hasn't had to say a spell aloud in months. Punching Remus's lying face will feel good anyway, James thinks as he tosses his wand to the ground with a clatter and balls his hands into fists. Chapter 3. Remus. It's not a fair fight. Remus cheats. He can't help himself. It comes naturally. Werewolves have denser bones than normal people, which means he punches harder. Fists barely rate the pain scale because he's woken up in a pool of his own blood with broken bones 130-odd times. James never stood a chance. James can't hurt him with violence, but Remus can hurt James. And Remus deeply, deeply wants to hurt James. James's words are ringing in his head. Breaking his nose doesn't do much to stop him hearing. It's all you're good for anyway, over and over, but it makes him feel better. He wants to make him bleed, to make him scream, to give him the faintest understanding of what actual pain feels like, because he can't make him feel what hopelessness feels like. Not James Potter. Not someone who will never have to work for anything in his life, but can swagger into career counseling and declare he's going to be Minister for Magic. Remus skipped his. There wasn't a point. Prongs gets a good crack across his face. It shakes the thoughts out of his head. They grapple for a moment, and Remus loses ground. But he's a dirty fighter, so he brings his knee up hard between James's legs, and a razor-sharp grin pulls at his lips when James howls and falls to his knees in front of him. Remus pulls his wand again, sucking in air. His lungs are burning, but he won't give James the pleasure of seeing him struggle to breathe. He levels his wand on James between his eyes. He thinks about hexing him, thinks through the curses he knows and the jinxes he's used 1,000 times, probably in this very hallway. That's too easy, he decides. James will shake it off, the same way he shakes off Slytherin's hexing him with a laugh after.
I'm going to do you a kindness you don't deserve.
He tells him,
And I'm not going to tell Sirius what you said.
James stares up at him with teary eyes, though Remus doesn't know if that's from the knee to his balls or regret. It's hard to tell with James. Remus thinks it's the pain.
Why?
Because I'm not going to watch him run away from another family. And I think it might kill him to lose yours.
Remus says. He watches James's face crack, and well, he thinks James Potter can know hopelessness. It's there on his face.
You'd know all about that, wouldn't you?
James asks him, choking on the words. Remus flicks his wand. The crack in the lens of James's glasses seals.
Get up!
He says,
I'm not done hitting you.
I'm not going another round with you.
James slumps down, hands over his face. He sounds wrecked.
I'm not.
He chokes on another sob.
McGonagall gave me tea.
He says as though that's supposed to mean anything.
Get up.
Remus repeats.
No, Moony, I don't. I won't.
He stuffs his wand back into his robe and hauls James to his feet.
Don't call me that right now.
You should have told me.
James shouts, balling his fists into the wool of Remus's jumper.
You should have fucking told me, you bastard.
What are you talking about?
Remus snaps at him.
Sirius.
James screams, voice raw.
He tried, and you just kept it from me.
Remus shoves James hard against the wall, his arm across James's chest and shoulders, holding him there, digging in until he's sure it hurts. Then he presses harder.
I want to make one thing abundantly clear to you, Prongs.
He says, his voice a dangerous coil, anger bleeding into frustration.
You're my best friend. I would do almost anything for you. But if you think I'll ever betray his trust for your sake, you've lost your fucking mind.
Screw you.
James manages to choke out.
He's my brother. He wanted to die. You should have told me.
Screw you.
Remus says,
He's my whole heart, and he wrote his last words to you.
Remus drags James to the hospital wing because he's a better man than to leave his friend bleeding on the floor, even if he's the one who did it, and even if James earned every punch. The ward smells like antiseptic and cloves when he opens the door. Sirius can't stand the antiseptic smell. He insists on tossing cloves in the fire whenever he's there. It doesn't mask anything, but it does make the ward distinctly his when he's on it. Remus smells it, and his eyes flutter closed for a moment, and he thinks Sirius. It's almost Pavlovian now, after 3 months of Sirius being here. They don't even get 2 feet inside the door when Remus stops, listening, because he hears Sirius chattering at someone. He's been a patient in this ward enough times to stop and give at least the appearance of privacy.
It's all right, Thad.
Sirius says from a closed-off exam bed, behind a curtain.
It's normal to feel awful sometimes. It happens to everyone.
Not like this.
A small, high voice says.
Even like this, I promise.
Sirius sounds so kind. It makes a smile tug on Remus's lips, despite the ache blooming in his ribs and James bleeding against his shoulder. He hears the springs on the hospital bed, and that small voice says something else, too soft for Remus to hear.
Even me.
Sirius says,
So come find me when you feel like that, and we can talk if you'd like.
I can't just have a cheering charm.
The springs creak again.
No, Thad. Cheering charms only make you feel better for a little while, and then you're right back to feeling the same. They don't fix anything, believe me. But if you ask Professor Sprout if you can talk, she'll listen to you. She probably has some good advice. I always feel better after I talk to Professor McGonagall.
There's a long moment of silence.
Are you sure you don't want to tell me who hexed you?
Sirius asks, still sounding kind.
No, Healer Black.
Thad says,
I'm not a telltale, you know.
Ah,
Sirius says. He sounds annoyed and amused. Thad sounds like a first-year Remus knew once, one with curly black hair and sharp gray eyes.
I suppose that's very Hufflepuff of you, protecting your housemates from trouble. Are you going to be all right tonight back in the dorm, or do you want to stay here?
I'll go back.
He says.
Good lad, that's the spirit.
The curtain slides open and Sirius emerges with a tiny little Hufflepuff shadow.
Straight back to the common room, Thad. No detours. I'll know.
He says. Thad takes off, gunning for the door, past Remus and James. Sirius watches him go, and for a moment his face lights up when he sees them standing there, but then he must take in the state of them, because he turns straight to panic.
Merlin, what happened to you?
He asks, rushing over to them. He plucks James off of Remus and herds him to a bed. Remus follows behind him. He's better off than Prongs, but he thinks his hand might be broken. He knows there's going to be bruising all over his sides from Prongs' fists, but that isn't much of a bother. He's had worse.
We had a disagreement.
Remus says once James is settled and Sirius is casting diagnostic charms on him.
A disagreement?
Sirius echoes, glancing over at him.
With whom?
Remus gives him a tight smile.
It doesn't matter.
It very much does. I need to know who to set on fire when I'm done here.
Sirius bites on his lip and frowns when red smoke settles on James's nose. Broken, and no less than James deserves.
Snape.
James groans out. Remus knows it is a peace offering. It's an olive branch he's going to refuse because they're not sweeping this under the rug. Not this time. James's words hurt. He's not going to let James set Sirius on Snape and have a laugh about it after.
Don't blame Snape for this. I did it. It was me.
Remus sighs and drops into the chair by the bed. He hisses a little. His ribs might be bruised.
We had a disagreement. With each other.
Sirius blinks at him. His wand tip sparks purple, and he shakes his head, looking back down at James. He's a patchwork of red and orange smoke, blinking up at them.
If you're both going to lie to me, maybe I won't help you.
Sirius narrows his eyes.
Mulciber.
I'm not lying.
Remus says.
I punched him. He tried to hex me, you know. I think my ribs are bruised.
You've broken him.
Sirius waves his hands at James.
He's bleeding.
Remus gives him the most even, honest look he has in him.
Well, he deserved it.
I did.
James says miserably.
I'm a fucking wanker.
Sirius looks back down at James, skeptical.
I thought you were going to see what his strop was about.
He flicks his wand and James shouts, hands flying up to his face when his nose cracks back into place.
It merited a beating.
Yes.
He pauses.
I broke my hand, you know.
Sirius turns towards him as he casts a bone-knitting charm at James's kneecap.
Show me.
He says. Remus holds it up. 2 of his knuckles are already swelling.
Did you break it on his face?
Remus doesn't even bother to waffle.
Yeah.
He tells him. Sirius shakes his head.
Get a bed, Moony.
He says.
You're next, after I sort out this Burke. And then someone is going to tell me what happened, or I'll go and get McGonagall and tell her there were students fighting. What really happened tonight?
Sirius asks once he's settled in bed, facing Remus under the duvet. The curtains are spelled closed, there's a silencing charm on them, and Remus doesn't want to have this conversation at all.
We had a fight, Sirius.
He says tiredly.
That's all.
Sirius reaches out and ghosts his fingertips over the bridge of Remus's nose, down his cheek, across his lips. He presses down on the place where Remus knows he has a scar, on the plumpest part of his lip, and he has a wild, terrible thought that he should turn away from Sirius.
Hey.
Sirius scoots in closer until Remus has to go cross-eyed to look at him.
Moony mine, what's the matter?
Remus shakes his head and closes his eyes. He feels Sirius's hand wind into his hair, and he lets Sirius pull him in hide Remus's face against his neck. He told James he wouldn't tell him, and he can't tell him, because Sirius would go ballistic, and that would be the ultimate end. But he can't stop his own mind from turning James's words over in his head. He feels safe against Sirius, swaddled in warmth and shielded from the terrible things outside the bed curtains.
Do you think about...
Remus starts, speaking into the crook of Sirius's neck. He stops and takes in a shaky breath, sucking in citrus and cloves and that indescribable scent that's just Sirius, the smell of home and safety and love, and Remus wants to cry now. He hasn't. He didn't all evening, but he could now. He could, and Sirius would hold him through it, the way Remus held Sirius through the months of tears as his life fell apart twice before either of them could gulp down a lungful of air. Sirius slides his hand up underneath Remus's shirt, palm flat on the center of his back, rubbing small, soothing circles.
Mooney,
Sirius murmurs.
please tell me what's wrong.
I'm not going to be anything.
Remus says softly. Sirius stills.
What?
He takes in another huff of air and tries to sort his thoughts out. He can't say what he thinks, which is that James Potter won't be the only person to think that about Remus. People will see them together, Healer Black and his unemployed husband, and they'll think the same thing. He squeezes his eyes closed tighter and burrows deeper into Sirius's arms.
After Hogwarts.
He chokes back a sob.
I'm just going to be nothing.
That's not true.
Sirius tells him.
It's just not. We're going to find you something, you know that. We've talked about it, remember?
Remus doesn't say anything. He can't.
You're never going to be nothing, Remus.
Sirius promises.
Never. Even if you don't work a day in your life, you'll always be something to me, and to Peter, and to that arsehead who hit you too. Loving me is a full-time job anyway. I need an awful lot of care.
He kisses Remus's hair and Remus finally cracks, shaking with silent tears in Sirius's arms. Sirius lets him cry against him, rubbing circles on his back and whispering words that Remus can't hear into his hair. His voice is nice, soft, the deep rumble it takes on late at night and in the early mornings. Remus doesn't understand how he gets to keep him, why Sirius wants to wake up to him every morning and kiss him and spend 4 days a month taking care of him when he can't take care of himself. He deserves better than Remus can give him, which is another thing he thinks but will never say. Sirius keeps him tight in the cage of his arms, while he lets himself drown in his own fear until he doesn't have the energy to even cry anymore. He sniffles against Sirius's tear-damp neck and wipes his eyes on his sleep shirt and mutters apologies into his skin that Sirius shushes.
What really happened tonight, Remus?
Sirius asks him again softly, petting at his hair, still rubbing circles on his back under his shirt.
It doesn't matter.
He rasps.
If it hurt you like this, it matters.
Sirius sighs against the crown of his head.
You're never going to be nothing.
He says again, softly into his hair, reverent. He wakes up alone in the morning, eyes crusty with last night's tears and feeling stuffy. It's still early, dawn filtering in through open bed curtains, and he can hear the furious whispering from across the room. He wonders if that's what woke him.
You don't get to demand anything from him.
Sirius whisper shouts.
And if I choose not to tell you something, that's my choice, Prongs.
I should have been told.
Comes James's angry reply.
Have you considered that I didn't want to talk about it?
Sirius's voice is leaking frustration.
McGonagall was trying to be a therapist, and Remus was trying to hold both of us together with sheer willpower, and maybe I needed somebody to not know, and treat me like I wasn't broken.
Remus sucks in a breath through his teeth.
You aren't broken.
James says.
Don't say that.
Well, I feel that way sometimes.
Sirius sighs.
It doesn't matter. I asked him not to tell you, and you're a twat for getting mad at him for keeping his promise.
I'm your brother.
I don't care. That doesn't give you the right you think it does. Don't punch my fiancé. Next time, I'll be less polite in reminding you not to.
He punched me first.
And I'm sure you did nothing to deserve that.
Remus can't see them from where he's buried in the blankets, but he knows the precise look on Sirius's face. Narrowed eyes and downturned lips, sarcasm dripping off his words.
I'm going back to bed. Apologize to him in the morning, you prick.
Remus slams his eyes closed as the curtains pull back, but he isn't stupid enough to think he'll fool Sirius. They've been sleeping in the same bed almost every night for 1.5 years, and on and off before that. Padfoot knows what he looks like when he's sleeping and what he looks like when he's pretending. He keeps his eyes closed until he hears Sirius silence the curtains again. Then he opens them and looks up at him.
I don't think you're broken.
He says,
I never said you did, eavesdropper.
Sirius slumps down, sprawled out on his side on top of the duvet. He sighs and reaches out for him, grabbing at his fingers and squeezing them.
You keep me put together.
I don't think that's healthy.
Sirius brings their linked hands up and kisses Remus's knuckles. Remus's eyes flutter shut again. It's a nice feeling. Padfoot's lips are soft, and his stubble scrapes against the back of Remus's hand.
I don't need you to do it.
Sirius says, slowly and deliberately, which makes Remus pay attention and squash down his urge to interrupt.
I can do it myself, now at least. But you want to, and it's good. It's the best thing I've ever felt, being loved by you.
Remus is glad he has his eyes closed already. Sometimes when Sirius says things like that to him, looking at him is like looking directly into the sun. It's blinding and overwhelming. Sometimes the intensity of Sirius's love for him is too much, and he thinks he's going to burn up in it. He fell in love with brash, ridiculous Sirius, who thinks the height of humor is dung bombs and burping, but he loves this Sirius, his Sirius, the one who looks at him as though he's the center of the universe and whispers solemn, beautiful things to him when they're alone. He didn't know this version of Sirius existed when he fell in love with him. He's sometimes glad about that. He might have been too scared if he had.
Hey, no.
Sirius whines a little.
Don't cry at me, Moony.
He wipes his eyes furiously, cheeks heating.
I'm not crying. Again.
He adds in his own head.
You can if you need to. Godric knows I've cried an ocean on you. But I'm just trying to be sweet to you. I don't want to make you cry.
You are being sweet.
Remus promises. He reaches up with his free hand and wraps one of Sirius's curls around his fingers.
Too sweet, maybe.
I've watched you with sweets, Lupin.
Sirius says.
I've seen you eat an entire box of sugar quills for dinner. There's no such thing.
Chapter 4. Sirius. Moony falls back asleep, breathing going deep and even, and Sirius turns over onto his back. So another thing that's his fault, then. They've all cracked each other across the face now and then. James and him the most, probably, of the four of them. But James came in with a broken kneecap and a broken nose, and 4 of Remus's ribs were cracked, which he certainly didn't do to himself. He knows better now than to think they'd be happier if he were gone, but he does sometimes still think they'd all be happier to have never known him at all. He could have chosen to not have a 5-minute argument with a sentient hat, and Peter and James and Remus would have been a merry band of 3, terrorizing the halls. It's a bad thought. One McGonagall made a very sad face at the first and only time he voiced it. He scrubs his hands over his face, then pushes open the curtains, looking over at James's bed. He's sitting up in it, hugging his knees, staring at nothing out the window. Sirius isn't going to fall back asleep. He knows that about himself. So he pushes himself up and out of bed and pads across the stone. He sits on the edge of James's bed.
Prongs,
he says, and stops himself because he isn't sure what to say next.
Come to shout at me some more.
James asks, keeping his eyes on the forest out the window. Sirius sighs and leans into him, arm against arm.
No.
He answers.
I'm not sorry I hit him back.
James says.
I'm not Sirius, and I won't apologize for it.
Sirius doesn't say anything for a while. He lets his head loll to the side onto James's shoulder, and he sighs again.
I don't want you to hit each other at all.
He settles on.
Tell that to Fists of Fury over there.
James mutters darkly.
I don't remember him punching so hard.
He pulls his punches.
Sirius says. Remus told him that ages ago, after a fight with Mulciber in the halls when they were 14 and more stupid than they are now. James snorts.
Not anymore, I guess.
Suppose not. At least not when his best mate's telling him he's worthless.
Sirius tries to keep his voice even, and he thinks he does an all right job. James stills underneath his cheek, and Sirius knows he got it right. It's the only thing that makes sense.
I didn't mean it like that.
The words come out weak, and not at all like James Potter.
He took it like that.
Sirius shifts and looks up at James's face.
I'd have hit you too, you know. You know better. He told me he was going to be nothing.
James closes his eyes and lets his head fall onto his knees.
I didn't mean it.
He says again.
I was just angry. I'm still angry.
Be angry at me.
James shakes his head.
No.
I can handle it. Don't treat me like a baby. Be angry at me, Prongs. He just kept a promise to me. I kept it from you.
I don't want to be angry at all anymore.
He sounds wrecked. Sirius nudges himself closer so they're pressed together side to side. He hopes it grounds James half as well as it does for him.
I just don't want to be the last person to know. You're important.
I'd prefer no one knows.
Sirius lets out a breath, slow and measured, and takes another one in.
I'd rather it never happened in the first place, but it happened to me. It didn't happen to you.
I'd tell you if it were me.
Sirius pauses and considers his words because he doesn't want to make this worse.
It wasn't you.
He wets his lip and stops again, taking another deep breath.
I'm not you, and you can be mad at me for that all you want, but you can't be mad at Remus for it.
James finally looks at him.
Do you not trust me?
Did I say that?
Seems to be the implication.
Prongs looks tired. Sirius did good work. There's not a scratch on him, but Sirius knows it hurts long after the healing spells take care of the physical damage. He shakes his head.
It's mine to talk about. No one else has the right.
And he supposes that's the bitter end of his time with McGonagall. That's going to be a hard conversation to have. He genuinely likes talking to her. He likes knowing he can go to her. He thinks about Sunday night with Evans in the library. He'd gotten himself out of that one. He might be all right on his own now.
I don't get it.
James says.
I don't understand why.
Sirius reaches out and grabs one of James's wrists.
Because sometimes things aren't for everyone. Some parts of my life aren't yours, James.
Not that. I don't understand why you wanted to. Why you?
Tried to kill myself.
He supplies, because saying the words matters. James flinches and looks away, which Sirius finds curious in some distant part of his head.
Yeah.
James says softly.
You said, at home, you thought it would make everything right. And it wouldn't. Everything would just be wrong.
Sirius squeezes James's wrist.
It'll never make sense, you know. The reasons. I had 1,000 reasons. I felt like I was drowning all the time, even before the incident. You and Mooney are the best things that have ever happened to me, you know. You were both keeping me above water, and I thought I lost you both. I should have, by all rights. Neither of you should ever want to speak to me again.
James whips his head back toward him.
You made a mistake. We've both told you that 1,000 times.
It wouldn't have mattered if you all died, whether I meant it or not.
Sirius lets out his air and takes in another breath. He's proud of himself for this. It's hard. 6 months ago, he would have been hiding under his bed as Padfoot at the thought of it. But he's doing it.
Sirius,
You're going to be mad at Mooney for a while,
he says, cutting him off.
and that's okay. I hate when you fight, but I'm not going to make you say sorry when you aren't. But you don't get to blame him for things I do, James. And you don't get to tell him he's worthless. He isn't. I'll remind you I gave up my entire legacy for him, and I would have given up more if I had to. There isn't a price I wouldn't pay to keep him safe with me.
I didn't mean it.
James says, insistent.
I didn't.
You need to tell him that, not me.
Sirius sighs. He's tired now and he wants to be alone more than anything.
I'm going to go for a walk. I need to be alone for a little bit. I'm all right. You don't need to follow me.
Take your mirror.
It sounds like begging, which Sirius hates hearing.
I will.
He promises. It's still too early when Sirius finds himself standing outside of McGonagall's door. He's human this time and determined, because this is a violation of trust that he won't be able to get out of his head. He takes a deep breath and knocks. She answers the door in her dressing gown with her hair under a sleeping cap.
Sirius,
She asks.
is everything all right?
No,
He tells her.
we need to talk.
She lets him in. He doesn't go for the chair or for a biscuit. There's no joy in this visit. There isn't even the profound sadness of some of them, or the terror from earlier in the term when he thought he was going mad. She watches him carefully as he paces a little on her rug, and then he stops.
What's wrong?
She asks. He takes a breath, and then another.
When I woke up in hospital, I asked for one thing.
He forces himself to look at her because he's stronger now. He can do this.
I didn't even ask you not to tell my parents. I asked you not to tell James.
She says nothing, just watches him with her hands at her side and her eyes guarded.
I asked for one thing, Professor, and I said I'd do whatever you wanted if you didn't do that one thing. I'd go to therapy. I'd go to Mungo's. I'd quit the Quidditch team. Anything.
He sucks in another deep breath, feeling suddenly like everything is spinning.
And I'm sorry about the animagery. I'm sorry. I know it was dangerous and I know you're angry, but I needed it to be a secret because it's not for me. But you told him and I...
Sirius throws his hand up over his mouth, trying to choke back a sob that's threatening.
And he got into it with Remus and now...
And now everything is falling apart again, he wants to say. And now he's drowning again. He's learned how to swim since the last time, though. That's the difference.
I'm not angry about the animagery. I was scared because it's dangerous and you could have been hurt.
She says, kind voice, kind eyes, sad expression. He knows that face. She's used it 1,000 times on him now.
Sirius, I didn't tell Potter anything. I wouldn't even if I had been angry with you.
He said,
He said you told him what happened in October. I was shocked. I thought if you ever reached a point where you felt comfortable telling him, it would be years away. And as we've discussed, you have control over your life and get to make your own choices. And I wouldn't push.
She says with a stern little look.
He correctly guessed that you did more than write a letter.
She summons her teacup from the other room, and it flies smoothly into her hand. Not a drop spilled.
I said nothing, Sirius. I keep my promises.
Sirius breathes out a shuddering breath.
he guessed.
She nods at him and sips her tea.
We talked about what happens after, like we have, and like I have with Remus, in the context of what I knew he knew for a fact, which is that you were suicidal and wrote a letter.
Sirius goes to the red wingback chair and sits down.
You didn't tell him.
I'm insulted you thought I would.
She says, but there's no bite to it.
I told you then, and I'll tell you again, what you say to me is between us, unless you explicitly tell me I can tell someone else.
She conjures him a teacup and goes to take her own seat behind her desk.
I was going to break up with you.
Sirius tells her.
Then you would have been taking monthly trips to St. Mungo's.
She says mildly.
Monthly. We don't even do monthly anymore.
He carefully sniffs the tea. She's still on Scottish breakfast, which he can't stand.
I've relinquished your Thursdays to Madame Pomfrey because it's good for you, and because I know you'll knock on my door when you need me. If you're seeing someone at St. Mungo's, I would require you to make and keep appointments.
She leans back and watches him for a moment.
Has it been the end of the world with Potter knowing?
Yes,
He says desperately.
they're hitting each other. And James said something terrible to Mooney. And when I say they're hitting each other, I mean broken ribs and a broken nose.
She purses her lips.
I'll speak to them.
No, Merlin, I'll deal with it.
No, Sirius, you won't.
She taps the desk.
Students fighting falls under my purview, I think.
They're fighting over me. That's my mess to sort out.
She looks amused at that.
I worried when you were called for Gryffindor that you'd have a hard time finding friends. I suppose that was misplaced fear.
He lets himself laugh at that.
Shock of your lifetime, I'm sure, how well I fit.
No, Sirius.
She says.
You're a Gryffindor through and through.
Chapter 5, James. James is in a rotten mood. He's been in a rotten mood since yesterday afternoon, but it's only gotten worse. He's been shouted at. He's been beaten up. Certainly Mooney could have gone easier on him, like the scuffles in fourth year when they were both vying for Sirius's attention without realizing that's what they were doing. That had been more level ground, and they both came up with split lips and bruised egos, Sirius rolling his eyes at them both. This isn't that, and it isn't then. They're both bigger and stronger. They're also both supposedly smarter, but James is starting to wonder. McKinnon and MacDonald are always shouting at him to use his words, and he might want to start listening. He crossed a line, and he crossed it first. He didn't mean it like that. He really didn't. It was supposed to be a stupid barb, just some remark that made Mooney back off and leave him alone. But he was a wanker, and the Mischief Maker Code says generally wankery is allowed except toward each other, and he owes the pot for that. Mooney owes the pot too. He'll pay up when Mooney does. Sirius leaves him in the early dawn, and he doesn't sleep again. He can't, not turning over everything in his head like he is. James wonders about the 1,000 reasons Sirius had, and if he were any of them, and if he's been adding to his pain without knowing. For a sickening moment while he looks out at the brightening sky, he imagines what would have happened if Sirius succeeded, if the Gryffindor 6th dorm only had 3 beds in it. His hazy thoughts are black and white, a jumble of 3 grief-stricken young men, who all felt like they lost an arm. Peter rouses somewhere around 6 and leaves with a muttered bye. James doesn't know where he's off to. Peter's been off on his own a lot recently. He worries sometimes that they're excluding him, but Wormtail's always up for a good time whenever there's one to be had. The alone time probably involves half of the Hufflepuff 6th girls anyway, which James would rather not think about. By 7, the sky is bright and the castle is awake and James is still in bed, fretting about Sirius. He's been gone for hours. He reaches for his mirror but stops himself. He wonders if this is why he wasn't allowed to know, if the worry would be smothering and overwhelming for Sirius, who sometimes needs to be left alone to burn off whatever he's feeling. They have potions at 9. He'll see him. He goes to breakfast alone, which is something he's sure has only happened a handful of times in 6 years. He feels out of sorts, but being out of the dorm helps. Walking helps. Knowing he'll see Sirius in potions helps. Lily's holding a place for him at the table. He can't stop himself from grinning like a fool despite his mood. She's waiting for him. That helps too. A lot.
Morning.
She says. He kisses her cheek because he's allowed to do that now.
Morning.
He answers.
You look like you're walking to the executioner, not to breakfast.
He collapses onto the bench next to her, back against the table.
Trouble with the gents.
He says.
Nothing to worry about.
She makes a noise of agreement.
I heard about your trouble.
She says.
Dorcas said she saw Remus dragging you to the hospital wing.
He gestures at his own face.
It was a scuffle, but I'm fine. Sirius fixed me up.
She looks at him almost guiltily.
Was it Severus?
No, actually, and I'd rather not talk about the details if you don't mind.
He kicks his legs out in front of him.
Should I be worried about Snape coming for my guts?
Lily stabs at her sausage with more force than necessary.
I don't know, James. Maybe he's unhinged.
That perks him up to attention. From what he understood, the Snape matter was largely closed. Lily'd gotten her revenge, told him to fuck off in not so many words, and skipped happily into the sunset with a new friend with better hair, and frankly a more befitting set of morals. Sirius is far from perfect, but he knows the base level right from wrong. Snape doesn't.
Well, I know that.
He says once his mouth starts working.
I've known that the whole time. Has he done something?
She lets her fork clatter to the plate.
He told Caradoc to tell me that he knows about us as though it's some secret, or any of his business.
James waves his hand.
I don't care. What's he going to do? Scowl at me?
Lily turns towards him, frowning.
He's gotten into all sorts of nasty magic with Mulciber and Lestrange. He writes Malfoy all the time, or he was. I don't know what he's doing anymore. He's angry.
James is certain Snape's always been into nasty magic with his little junior blood supremacist club friends. What started as little hallway scuffles escalated quickly, and by the start of last year, Snape was practically hurling kill shots at them. Things calmed down after the incident, mostly because Sirius and Remus avoided him like the plague for 6 full months, which James realizes makes more sense in context now. He wonders how many other things will. He hates this.
I can defend myself against tall, dark, and greasy,
He says after too long in his own head. She makes a face.
Don't call him names.
If he's coming from my guts, I'll call him whatever I like. He calls himself names, I know you know. I've seen his notebooks. Half-Blood Prince, my arse.
Yes.
She says, deadpan.
You wouldn't know anything about ridiculous nicknames.
He grins at her, leaning in closer.
One day, I'll tell you what it means. That's a promise.
She swoops in and kisses him on the lips. His brain stops working. He stops breathing. He's fairly sure he's hallucinating, but her lips are soft against his, and when she pulls away, he can feel her lip gloss on his lips. He has to stop himself from reaching up and touching it. Lily leans back and smiles, small and secretive.
Well, look at that.
She says, amused.
I've found something that can shut up James Potter.
When they get to the potions classroom, Sirius is already there. Leaning across the table Lily usually sits at, chin on his fist, chatting with McKinnon. That reminds him of Quidditch practice this evening, and he's looking forward to Quidditch practice. There's something calming about yelling at his teammates to tighten up and bank harder that makes his worries drain away. Ducking under bludgers, and occasionally McKinnon's bat when she gets annoyed with him, forces him to focus all his attention on one thing. He's looking forward to knocking the smirk off Regulus Black's smug face next weekend, too. Games against Slytherin are always personal, but it's a little something extra this year, now that Regulus is the captain, twerpy little shit that he is. James fetches them a cauldron from the stack and keeps one eye on Sirius while he fits it onto the stand. He's so busy watching Sirius and McKinnon that he doesn't notice until it's too late that Snivelus is hovering at the edge of the table, wand in his hand, sneering at James.
Potter,
Snape says,
keep your hands off of Lily.
Hello to you two.
James draws back.
No, fuck off.
Snape narrows his eyes at him.
I saw you this morning, you know.
In the Great Hall, that big public space where we all see each other. Truly terrifying. I'm quaking. Try again.
Sirius saunters over to the other side of the table, opposite Snape, looking for all the world like he hadn't been up half the night, trying to comfort James and Remus both. Clear eyes, neat hair, his tie knotted loose in that way he liked it best. Roguish, but not messy. He looks like he used to after a bad letter from Walburga, the mess underneath hidden behind arrogance and vanity.
Snivelus,
He says,
what a surprise. You've come to visit our humble little bench.
James flicks his eyes between them. They're both standing on either end of the table with the cauldron between them. He's not lit the flame, thank Merlin, because Sirius already lights enough things on fire. He doesn't need help.
Black, how nice of you to pull yourself up off your knees long enough to grace us with your presence.
James sees the unhinged glee spark in Sirius's eyes, and he knows this isn't going to end well at all.
Well, I couldn't give Evans tips with my mouth full, could I?
He asks, positively giddy.
Could be useful one day, who knows? Cover the teeth and all that. I've got this clever thing I do with my tongue, but of course every man's different. I only know what works for Ree.
Sirius takes the hex like a pro. He flails back into the table behind them, knocking into Dearborn's cauldron, but he rights himself, sucking in a breath before he straightens up and twists his lips into a razor-thin smirk.
Adorable. You hex like my great-uncle Marius.
Isn't he a squib?
James asks, knowing the answer.
Yes?
Sirius rights Dearborn's cauldron and stalks back to the table, flattening his palms on the tabletop and leaning forward.
Where was I? Oh, the tongue.
Snape growls. James, having heard actual growls from an actually scary werewolf, thinks it's kind of cute in a pathetic sort of way. He also thinks Sirius is fast approaching a line where other people are going to draw wands, and Slughorn could waltz through the door at any moment. Sirius seems to also recognize this because his grin twists up into something wicked, and James knows that the end is near.
Black,
Snivelus sounds unbalanced.
don't speak about her like that.
Her. I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about me. I love sucking cock, as you so kindly pointed out. We do have one thing in common, though. Evans and me.
He leans closer.
Neither of us would go anywhere near yours.
It was uncalled for, Sirius.
Lily says as they push out of the doors to the potions classroom.
Me, what I did was uncalled for. He hexed me twice.
Sirius objects, tugging out the knot in his tie and going for the buttons on his shirt.
I've got welts.
I don't need to see them, I believe you.
She sighs.
I just don't know why you have to perpetually go after him and make it worse.
He absolutely started it.
Sirius says.
He did.
James agrees.
I didn't summon him to utter threats, or to slander Padfoot.
Sirius arches an eyebrow.
Well, it's not slander, but Snivelus has no business talking about where and when I'm on my knees.
Don't use me to needle him.
She says, it's sharp and stern, and gives James pause for just a moment.
Oh, Miss Revenge Plot is suddenly against using people for their own ends.
Sirius is grinning when he says it, and that's okay.
I was clearly being used in September, very specifically to needle him. Turnabout is fair play.
She stops and gives him a long, considering look.
You're right.
She says.
I know I am.
He tells her, looking smug about it. Lily rolls her eyes.
Just less crudely, Sirius, and don't start anything.
I didn't start anything, and I'll remind you he was crude first.
Lily throws up her hands.
You lot. Last night with whatever happened to you and Remus, James, and now this. Is there something in the bloody air? Is it the full moon or something?
No.
James and Sirius both say together. James stifles a laugh because it isn't funny, but it's definitely funny in the awful kind of way.
Moon's not full till the 3rd.
Sirius says.
It's just boring, regular spring restlessness.
Lily turns and eyes him.
You just know the lunar chart.
Sirius shrugs.
I quite literally worship the sky,
He says, gesturing upward.
and I don't know if you noticed, but the moon is in the sky.
Lily seems satisfied by that answer. That's all James can ask for. He might be angry and hurt, but a secret's still a secret, and a promise is still a promise. That makes something knock guiltily in his head, but he ignores it in favor of putting his arm around Lily. He gives her a squeeze.
Come to lunch with us.
He asks Sirius.
Got to go deal with the welts.
You can't just...
James mimics flicking a wand. Sirius rolls his eyes.
Yes, let me turn my wand on myself and hope I don't vanish a nipple.
James considers this.
That would be funny.
He decides.
Not.
Sirius says.
I'm going to see Pomfrey and then I'm going to go rouse Sleeping Beauty. Wanker. Friday's off, while I have to sit in class all day.
They pause at the bottom of the stairs out of the dungeon. James is suddenly twitchy again, desperate to keep Sirius in eyeshot.
I can come with you.
Sirius sighs and aims a frustrated glare at him.
We're talking about this later.
He says,
I have the mirror. Go eat lunch with your girlfriend.
Oh, Lily's my girlfriend, but nobody dare utter the word boyfriend around you on pain of death.
He grumbles. Sirius tosses up 2 fingers and starts down the hall toward the far stairs in the hospital wing. Lily titters and pulls James up the stairs.
See you in arithmancy.
She calls to Sirius as he heads around the bend. When he disappears, she stops, reaches up, and adjusts James's collar.
Who said I was your girlfriend?
You kissed me.
James says,
On the lips. I was there. That's girlfriend adjacent, at least.
At least.
Lily agrees, and she brings herself up onto her tiptoes and kisses him again. James's ability to pretend everything's fine comes crashing down after he drops Lily off at arithmancy. He spies Sirius through the open door, empty seat next to him for Lily, lounging with the chair tilted back and his legs up on the desk. That's normal. Lily kisses James's cheek goodbye, which isn't normal, but is definitely fine, and then she's off, trotting over to Padfoot and scolding him for scuffing the table with his boots. A normal, average Friday, one which didn't follow a day in which his entire life had been upended, and he definitely isn't angry at his best friend, and he definitely isn't afraid every time his brother is out of eyeshot. He considers sitting in on arithmancy, but Vector would kick him out in a minute flat. Lily would think he's ridiculous anyway, and Sirius would give him that frustrated look again, like James was being overbearing and grating by just wanting to be near him. So he leaves the 7th floor in search of something to do. He's not used to being left on his own anymore, hasn't been since he got on the Hogwarts Express for the first time. He burns off some restless energy running up to Ravenclaw and setting booby traps on the floor by the entry. All harmless stuff, but fun. He thinks about sticking around to watch, but Shacklebolt is still sore about Lily dumping him, and he doesn't need more trouble. James runs into Helen Roper on his way back down from Ravenclaw Tower, and she cries at him about Peter dumping her, which is a pity, honestly. James thought they were a good match. He's not sure how to console his friend's ex-girlfriend, but he thinks he does a decent enough job of it. By the time he escapes her claws, it's after 4, and he's thinking about going back to Gryffindor and getting a head start on his history essay, which is a desperate attempt to fill the evening with something before dinner and Quidditch practice at 7. He doesn't get very far, though, before he's caught by the arm.
Potter,
McGonagall says.
Just who I was looking for.
He looks at her, taking in her stern face, the badly disguised anger in her eyes, and he frowns.
Professor, what's wrong?
We need to have a chat.
She says.
Snape started it.
James blurts out.
And Sirius didn't even have his wand out, so whatever you've heard, we're innocent.
Her nostrils flare.
My office?
She orders.
Now, Potter.
She doesn't let go of him and marches them both up a flight of stairs and down the hall to her office.
Sit.
She motions to the chair, which he takes, and watches her settle behind her desk. Curiously, she says nothing. She isn't even looking at him. He sits in the red wingback chair, waiting for her to say something for what feels like an eternity. She doesn't. She's jotting notes on a piece of parchment, sipping her tea, and James thinks she might be trying to get him to confess to something without doing the work, which isn't on. Just getting up and leaving crosses his mind for a moment, but even moving will probably land him in detention. He sits, without tea, thank you very much, and watches her. Eventually she glances up at him.
I have given you more lenience than any student in this school rightfully deserves,
she says.
I understand being clever means school is not always engaging enough, and I've allowed you to make mistakes and learn from them without being punished because I was young once myself. I've allowed this, Potter.
Thank you.
It comes out as a question, and more careful than he intended. She puts her quill down and turns toward him.
You have found the line. You don't get to lie about me, Potter. You don't get to say I said things I didn't. And you certainly don't get to shove yourself into a situation about which you have perilously limited knowledge and decide you know best.
His stomach sinks.
Professor.
He tries, rather more meekly than he intended. She holds up a hand.
Do not speak,
she says.
You're going to listen, Potter. It might be the first time in your life, but you're going to listen to me today.
I just...
No, Potter, you're listening.
She frowns at him, lips a thin line. He nods, wide-eyed, and he shrinks back into the chair.
I understand you're having a difficult time, and you're upset and feeling left out of Sirius's life. It's his life, not yours, and he gets to decide who is privy to what parts of it. You don't get to take his agency from him. You don't get to take your frustration out on him.
She levels another half-furious look at him.
You also don't get to take that out on Lupin, with words, wands, or fists, because you mightn't have cared to ask Potter. But you'd do well to consider how he must feel, if you feel like this.
James wants to object, he wants to cut in, but he thinks she might hex his mouth shut if he tries, so he just sits, listening. Not for the first time in his life, but maybe more closely than he would have otherwise.
I've spent the last 18 months building trust that you almost tore down in a single evening. Consider the kind of power you have over him before you open your mouth next time.
She waves her hand.
You may speak now.
Everything he wanted to say falls out of his head. He looks down at his lap for a while, thinking and considering his words.
I'm sorry.
He says. He doesn't look up.
I shouldn't have implied you told me anything. I just didn't want him to lie to me. I wasn't thinking.
She shifts in her chair but stays quiet. He supposes it's fully his turn then.
I can't stop thinking about it.
He says.
I can't stop wondering why or if I made it worse, or what would have happened if he...
James sucks in a breath.
He went for a walk this morning and I almost lost my mind worrying about him. And I just keep thinking that he doesn't trust me. And I thought I was. We're brothers.
McGonagall watches him carefully.
He trusts you more than he trusts anyone.
She tells him.
He doesn't need a minder. Remember what we spoke about, looking forward.
James nods.
He's trying to...
She says.
Let him.
They're both quiet for a while. McGonagall goes back to her notes. James knows better than to think he's dismissed.
Remus hit me first, you know.
He says, feeling like a pedantic arse for pointing it out, but it's important to him.
I know.
She says, not looking up.
I spoke to Lupin this morning. He was up front about precisely what happened. He painted a very vivid picture for me.
James winces, imagining Remus repeating his words to McGonagall.
I didn't mean it.
McGonagall shakes her head.
I'm sure you didn't, but you still said it, and you'll still serve detention Monday evening for fighting in the halls.
He lets out a huff of air and nods.
I was going to try to book the pitch for Monday, get an extra practice in.
She glances up at him.
Would you prefer I give you detention tomorrow? I'll be happy to stay back from Hogsmeade so you can mark papers for me.
He thinks about Lily's lips on his and the tacky film her lip gloss left on his lips.
No, Monday's fine.
He makes a face.
Marking. I'm going to do marking.
Her quill pauses on the paper.
I'm sure you'll agree that you're qualified to mark the first-year papers on materials transfiguration.
She says.
Or am I misremembering a perfect score on your owl?
James looks away from her, cheeks heating just a little.
Well, yes.
He agrees.
I'm just used to polishing things, or mucking out Kettleburn's stables, or that week where I had to organize Slughorn's cupboards. Marking seems like getting off easy.
McGonagall hides a smirk behind her hand.
You'll change your mind by the time you're done with the first one, I promise.
Someone raps on the door. She opens it with a flick of her wrist, which is a neat trick James wants to learn. Sirius pokes his head inside. He flicks his eyes to James briefly. There's real fear there.
Professor.
Sirius.
He gives her a small, pained grimace.
Sorry about twice in one day.
He says.
The full moon knitting circle's got new members.
James's heart drops into his stomach. Chapter 6, Peter. Peter has very little patience for whatever is going on with his friends. James is acting utterly bizarre. Remus and Sirius spend all of their time behind hexed closed curtains. Peter knows they have an awful lot of sex, but there's no way they're having that much sex. All the drama is starting to get to him. They're 17, while the others are. He's nearly there. 6th year is supposed to be the fun year. Last year was owls. Next year is going to be all newts and job applications and Sirius's months-long journey applying to Oxmag. Peter decided back in September that he was going to enjoy 6th year. He has, by taking some time to himself away from the lads, mostly chasing skirts around Hogwarts. Sometimes pulling, sometimes getting slapped across the face, but it's what he thought 6th year was going to be. But sometimes, life gets in the way of his pursuit of happiness. Today, for instance. James and Remus beat the ever-loving hell out of each other last night, and James and Sirius spent the early dawn this morning first angrily whispering at each other, and then after, softly crying at each other. And that is fifth-year shite. So Peter decides to abandon ship. He takes off before breakfast and leaves them to whatever strange drama they find themselves in, incestuous or otherwise. Peter doesn't have class at all on Fridays, so he spends most of his day out at the greenhouses, tending to his bubotubers and making notes for his end-of-term project. He nicks some food off the house elves for lunch, rather than try to find a place to squeeze in at Gryffindor, and then spends some time out by the lake, looking for gillyweed growing wild by the shore. He gets bored around 3, and he goes looking for company, which is how he finds himself out in the courtyard, sandwiched between McKinnon and Evans, fresh from arithmancy and gossiping. Unlikely companions, but neither of them are tearfully whispering anything to each other, so Peter latches on to the both of them like a lifeline.
So you've dumped Roper?
McKinnon says.
Not sure why, she's got excellent assets.
She makes a motion in front of her own chest that makes Peter snicker.
Marlene.
Lily scolds.
She does.
McKinnon throws her hands up.
I'm just pointing out facts, Evans. Roper's done is what matters, and Pettigrew needs a new white whale.
Peter nods at her. She's grinning, and if she weren't one of the ones who'd slapped him this year, he might have tried again. He respects their mutual adoration for the female form, though, and will take a friend over the alternative.
Lenora Pricklefoot broke up with her boyfriend last month.
Lily offers.
She's a 5th, but she's good-looking.
Lenora's dull aside from the...
He makes a motion in front of him that's a rough approximation of curves.
I'd like someone with shared interests, you know.
Well, that's a problem, Pettigrew,
McKinnon says.
Since all you care about are your roommates and tits, which means Potter's your only choice, and Potter's recently caught himself his own white whale.
She waggles her eyebrows at Evans, who laughs into her hand.
That's not true.
Peter objects.
I have interests, McKinnon, sweets and herbology, and...
He throws his hands up.
I like Quidditch. That's an interest people have.
McKinnon quirks an eyebrow.
I've never seen you on a broom once in the last 6 years. Do you even know how to fly?
He sticks his tongue out at her.
I like watching Quidditch. I keep statistics.
He says,
I've got a whole notebook on the Harpies, and I've been tracking the house game since first year.
Oh.
She leans forward, interested now.
How am I doing?
You've a better hit rate than Sirius, but I didn't say that.
She falls back against the bench they're sharing, laughing hysterically.
I'm absolutely telling him you said that. I'm telling him before the game next week. Maybe he'll pull his weight for once in his bloody life.
Peter fights back against the urge to get defensive on Padfoot's behalf. He does pull his weight. She's laughing, though, and he's seen them enough times sitting in the common room, bent together over pitch diagrams, having heated arguments over zone defense versus priority 1-to-1, to know that they are an excellent beater pair. They have the numbers to prove it, too. In the 10 games the two of them played together, only once have Gryffindor even had someone hit by a bludger at all. Last year, Sirius took one to the back. McKinnon was in pieces about it for weeks.
He's just as likely to start hitting bludgers at Peter if you do,
Lily says fondly.
Olive Merriweather.
No, I went to Hogsmeade with her sister. That's too weird.
Peter sighs and leans back against the bench, absently picking at the lint on his robe while he thinks.
I might have exhausted all possibilities.
Lily pats his shoulder.
You haven't. The right girl is out there, Peter.
And it isn't Mary, so cut it out.
McKinnon says, flashing her teeth at him.
I'm putting in the work, Pettigrew. I am going to woo that woman if it's the last thing I do.
Peter rolls his eyes and flips her 2 fingers.
Gretchen Howell likes Quidditch, and she's in my herbology study group. She's a bit shy, though, and a Ravenclaw. Sirius warned me they were boring. I should have listened.
McKinnon snorts.
Lupin probably would have been a Ravenclaw if not for the lycanthropy making him a brave little soldier. And Black's a dope with shockingly low self-awareness and a fetish for nerds in cardigans. Don't listen to his advice on romance.
Peter's blood runs cold. His eyes widen, and for a moment he feels like there's something sharp stuck in his throat. He frantically rewinds their conversation, looking for the place where he said anything he wasn't supposed to. There's nothing there. They hadn't even talked about Remus once since they met up in the courtyard. Evans shifts next to him.
What are you talking about?
She asks. McKinnon quirks an eyebrow.
The cardigans, Evans. It's out of control. Sometimes at practice, Lupin'll show up in the stands in that stupid cardigan with the patches on the elbows, and Black'll almost fall off his fucking broom.
The cardigans aren't really what?
McKinnon.
Marlene holds up her hands and they both stop speaking.
Genuinely, you two, I could not give a toss. I've known for ages. Subterfuge is neither of your specialties. Don't waste your energy trying.
Who's lying?
Evans looks stricken.
Remus isn't a... That's a hell of an accusation to make.
It's not an accusation, it's a statement of fact. I know. Lying to me isn't going to make me no less.
She puts her hands down.
If the industrial-grade scar salve scent wasn't a dead giveaway, the disappearances would be, and the fact that sometimes he can't move without looking like he's going to cry.
He's
Evans pauses, doubt replacing the shock on her face.
got arthritis, Miles.
Yes.
Peter agrees, clutching onto whatever shred of not a werewolf is on offer. His own mind is blank. There's a procedure for this, but he cannot remember what to do.
It's terrible.
Excruciating, I'm sure.
McKinnon deadpans.
And only for a few days a month, perfectly coinciding with the full moon. Bizarre.
Lily shakes her head.
You've gone batty, McKinnon.
She tells her. McKinnon levels a glare on them.
You need to work on your excuses. Arthritis. We're bloody wizards, there's a potion for arthritis.
Well, I don't know what you'd like to hear, since this is your wild notion.
Peter says, going for mean and landing somewhere in panic. Disaster triage, he thinks frantically. After November, when Regulus found out, McGonagall had sat them down and given them a plan on what to do that he does not remember, and he might have if the last time he went over what to do wasn't 5 bloody months ago. Distract, deflect, deny is all he can remember. McKinnon arches an eyebrow at him and leans forward. She's sort of terrifying, all teeth and angry eyebrows.
Do you think this is working on me, Pettigrew?
He doesn't answer her. He just looks around frantically for someone or something that he can use to get a message to McGonagall or James, because either of them would definitely know what to do. They're alone in the courtyard, though, which is a blessing, because if they weren't, this conversation would be so much worse.
I'm not an idiot,
She says, drawing out every word.
It's not a wild notion. Don't treat me like I'm a firstie. I'm telling you, I'm aware of the facts. I haven't sat through 37 of Black's rants on werewolf rights to be told I've got a wild notion.
He's very passionate about civil rights.
Peter tries.
You've taken one too many bludgers to the head, McKinnon.
Evans's voice is unsure, though, and Peter knows this is a lost cause. Even if they can walk away at a stalemate, it's too little, too late. She looks away from him, over Peter's shoulder to Evans.
Do you think I'm a bigot or something? Do you think I'm going to run off and tell everyone Lupin's medical history?
Something inside Peter snaps. He amends the disaster plan in his own head, adding defend in all capitals and underlined twice.
She doesn't fucking know, McKinnon.
He shouts at her.
So that's essentially what you're doing right now.
McKinnon pales. Peter can't bear to turn his head to look and see what's on Evans's face, though he knows he's going to have to face her eventually. He's not taking the fall for this. Sirius can clobber McKinnon all he wants, but Peter tried his best to get them out of this. Peter winces at the pure horror in that one syllable out of Evans's mouth.
He's really a werewolf.
He opens the door to the dorm. James isn't there, but Sirius's curtains are closed, and that means they are, and they're all Peter needs right now. He sends a finite at the curtains and screws up his courage.
I'm opening these bed curtains.
He says loudly.
I don't care if you've got clothes on or not, it's important.
Sirius yanks the curtain open and looks out at him, eyes narrowed. He's got a jumper on at least.
What if we were in the middle of something?
He asks. Peter peers into the closed-off bed. Remus has the Marauder's map in his lap, and Sirius has a book open in front of him and a pile of notes by his knee. They're both fully dressed. Peter splutters.
Is this what you've been doing behind hexed curtains?
He asked, outraged.
Not usually, just sometimes. Everyone leaves us alone this way.
Sirius says as though it's obvious.
I think I've got the set of spells we need, but the last one's got a lot of weird wand work. I've been practicing.
He waves his hand at a pile of crumpled parchment in the middle of his bed.
I'll get there.
McKinnon and Evans both step inside the dorm. McKinnon has Evans's arm in a vice grip. Sirius peers out through the gap in the curtains at them, and then looks back up at Peter, confused.
Emergency.
Peter blurts out as McKinnon closes the door behind her.
It's really not Pettigrew.
She says. She pulls Evans along behind her as she comes to stand next to Peter.
Hello, Black. You're wearing more clothes than Pettigrew thought you'd be.
We don't have practice until 7.
Sirius says. He glances at the clock on his bedside table.
You're 2 hours early for calling me late.
Too right.
She says.
Not here about Quidditch. Where's your boyfriend?
I haven't got a boyfriend.
Sirius says. He pulls a face at the word.
Would you rather I call him your sweetheart?
She asks. Sirius crinkles his nose.
Absolutely not. Why are all the choices awful?
Partner, maybe?
Remus reaches across Sirius and pulls the curtain back far enough to be seen. He peers out at them.
We're going with fiancé for now. I'm right here.
He looks between McKinnon and Evans.
What happened?
Peter gives McKinnon a look, because this is all her fault, and she's the one who has apologies to make anyway. He also doesn't have a death wish, so he isn't bearing this news to anyone.
I made a mistake.
She says strong and brave and adult in a way that Peter finds himself admiring.
I'm very sorry. I was under the impression all your friends knew, and I didn't account for Evans being outside your circle of trust. I made a crass joke about Black.
Sirius mutters something rude under his breath. Peter spies Sirius's wand by his pillow. He inches his fingers out and plucks it up off the sheet. He pockets it. He'll give it back after.
Okay.
Remus looks befuddled, all pursed lips and confusion.
You make crass jokes about Sirius 5 times a week.
Yes, but I also made a joke out of your medical condition, which was out of line, especially in mixed company, and I'm sorry.
My medical condition?
Worry starts to bloom on Remus's face. She doesn't break eye contact. She doesn't waffle. The hard look on her face softens. Peter thinks he sees the start of regret there, in her downturned lips.
Your lycanthropy specifically.
She says. Sirius falls out of the bed, flailing, reaching toward where his wand had been. Remus stays frozen, still half leaned across the space where Sirius was a moment ago.
McKinnon?
Sirius starts, groping for the wand that Peter definitely didn't move, so he can't hex anyone.
It doesn't matter to me,
she says, interrupting him.
I've known for a while. I assumed you'd told all your friends and I was in safe company. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. It'll never happen again.
Remus remembers how to move. He crawls forward and gets out of bed rather more gracefully than Sirius managed to. He offers Sirius a hand and pulls him up. Sirius takes a step towards McKinnon, all blustering anger to cover the fear Peter can almost smell on him, but Remus grabs his wrist and Sirius deflates, looking back over his shoulder at him. They look at each other for a silent moment that feels like forever. Peter can't speak whatever language they're speaking with their eyes, but whatever passes between them calls off Sirius entirely, which Peter didn't think was actually possible.
What was the joke?
Remus asks, still looking at Sirius.
That Black has a fetish for nerds in cardigans mostly.
McKinnon catches Remus's eyes again.
I also accused you of being a secret Ravenclaw.
Nah.
Remus says. He tightens his hand on Sirius's wrist.
I'm not the secret Ravenclaw. I am the secret werewolf. How'd you figure it out?
My keen observational skills.
She says almost scathingly, but then she seems to notice and reels herself back in.
Little things that added up.
Remus finally looks at her.
You aren't frightened.
You aren't very frightening.
She says.
You came to Hogwarts with a stuffed rabbit. Truly the stuff of nightmares.
Remus laughs at that, but the look on his face doesn't change. Resignation, Peter thinks, which he isn't sure is better than the terror he'd expected. Sirius clears his throat.
Do I need to threaten you?
She shrugs.
I hope you know me well enough to know you don't. If it'll make you feel better, you can, though.
It won't, actually,
Sirius says. He runs his free hand through his hair and looks back at Moony for another moment. Remus steps forward next to him, and he lets go of Sirius's wrist. Peter relaxes a measure and fishes Sirius's wand out of his robe pocket. He holds it out to Sirius, who stares at it for a moment before taking it, glaring at Peter.
How are you holding up over there, Lily?
Remus asks. She blinks at him. Her face contorts into something resembling pity and then anger, and it settles somewhere in the region of sad.
I don't know.
Peter curses inwardly because in all the McKinnon madness he's forgotten about Evans, and now Sirius has a wand again, and Sirius might do something rash. Sirius takes 2 steps toward her. Peter lunges to grab his arm, but Evans throws herself at him, squeezing him around the middle. She says something to him that Peter doesn't catch, and Sirius turns his head back toward him and Remus, catching both their eyes with his own wide, shocked ones. She pulls back from Sirius and strides across the floor. She stands in front of Remus, watching his face with a sober expression on hers.
You could have told me.
She says to him.
I wouldn't have told anyone.
Snape hangs in the air. Peter thinks, faintly and meanly, that it's a bit ironic of her to worry about that, given the present company.
I've never actually told anyone,
Remus replies, which is true. Everyone's either been told by someone else or sorted it out themselves.
I know it's probably a shock to you, though. Are you okay?
Remus squeezes her shoulder. He looks surprised when she doesn't shrink away from him, which makes Peter want to punch something.
Shouldn't I be asking you that?
She asks him, blinking hugely at him. He laughs softly.
Old news for me.
He says,
I've had time to get used to it. You've had 5 minutes.
It's been about 30, actually.
McKinnon says.
We were in the courtyard arguing for a while.
Sirius's head snaps up.
Who else was in the courtyard?
No one.
She gives him a look, one of their Quidditch signals. Peter knows them by heart. He doesn't know what it means off the pitch, but Sirius relaxes a little.
I was aware of my surroundings, Black.
Not aware of your mouth, though.
Sirius says.
No, I was extremely aware of my mouth.
McKinnon frowns.
I'm tired of playing stupid, and Pettigrew and Evans are the least likely of your little club to kill me and bury me under Hagrid's pumpkin patch for saying it out loud.
Peter would object, but she's probably right. He went straight to panic after all.
So you outed him on purpose?
Sirius goes very still and balls his wand hand into a fist. Peter cautiously moves away from the sconce on the wall behind him.
I thought they both knew.
She sighs.
I was trying to out myself. As someone who also knew, I assumed. I was wrong. I won't do it again.
She grabs at his arm.
Sirius, we're friends. At least I hope you think I'm your friend, since I think you're mine. I don't want to hurt you or him.
We are.
Sirius sighs and closes his eyes.
Marlene, I need to keep him safe. You can never tell anyone else. Please.
I know you do. I won't, Sirius, I promise.
She tilts her head, considering him.
You'd burn the world down for him, wouldn't you?
I'd blow the fucking moon right out of the sky.
He agrees. They go quiet. Peter watches Evans and Remus out of the corner of his eye. They're still half-hugging, speaking to each other in low voices. Evans is visibly distraught. She reminds him of James, and the way he sat staring out the window for hours the night they sorted it out, cross-legged on his bed, crying on and off, with Sirius's letter declaring, "I've been in the library for a week. Werewolf is the only thing that fits." Peter wished at the time that Sirius was there to comfort James, since he was shit at it. He doesn't know who Evans needs.
We can't go to practice.
Sirius tells McKinnon, breaking their silence. She levels a dead-eyed look at him that frankly makes Peter's balls shrink up into his body, and it isn't even directed at him.
We're playing Slytherin in 8 days.
Sirius motions to where Evans is clutching onto Remus's shoulders and practically sobbing into his neck.
The disaster plan says we go to McGonagall when the knitting circle gets bigger.
I don't see a disaster.
She pokes him in the chest.
Unless you count what a disaster the code phrase knitting circle is. Potter came up with it, didn't he? No talent for naming things. I hope Evans never lets him name a baby.
This isn't a game, McKinnon, or a joke or a lark. It's his life. I'll prioritize that over everything.
She rolls her eyes.
And that's Lily Evans. She's probably going to be your sister-in-law. She barely rates an incident.
Which, of course, McKinnon has no way of knowing was the worst thing to possibly say. Peter scrambles between them.
I'll find James and tell him. He won't care. He'll be fine. You can practice later. Tomorrow, Sunday.
He knows he's babbling, but he doesn't want Sirius to fall into whatever place he goes in his own head when he gets upset about last year. Peter's not Sirius's brother or his boyfriend, but he is his friend. And he's also sometimes a rat with excellent hearing and a box of hay under his bed that his friends forget to think about. He knows things he shouldn't. He knows enough to know to be scared. Sirius looks at him, the fear on his face tinged with guilt, and Peter feels the little hairs on the back of his neck stand up.
That's not how this works,
he says, sliding his gaze to where Mooney and Evans are, both sitting on the edge of Sirius's bed. Evans is holding his hand, which Peter thinks makes this one rate an occurrence. Maybe, at best.
No loose ends?
I'm not beholden to some harebrained scheme brewed up by you lot after a long night with a bottle of fire whiskey.
She tells him hotly, She stops and takes a breath, regaining her composure and standing up straighter.
No loose ends, you sound like a villain.
Who says I'm not?
He shakes his head.
Bad news, though. We didn't come up with the plan. McGonagall did, so unless you want to get dragged off the pitch by your ear, come willingly and have some of McGonagall's Scottish breakfast. It's awful. We have to drink it all so she'll refill with something respectable.
McKinnon raises both eyebrows and crosses her arms over her chest.
McGonagall gives you tea.
Yes. Do you not rate tea, McKinnon?
You have tea parties with our head of house.
She looks as though she's going to laugh.
You lot have been keeping the wrong secret. Big, bad Sirius Black has tea parties with McGonagall.
Frequent. I have frequent tea parties with McGonagall.
He says, and Peter relaxes because Sirius still has fear in his eyes, but Banner is good.
We tell each other's fortunes and talk about boys, and she's got a terrible Scottish breakfast right now, and I've been choking it down all term, so let's let Potter play with the second string, and maybe, if she likes you, she'll give you a shortbread.
She shakes her head, grinning, and turns away, going back over to where Moony and Evans are sitting to stand in front of them with her hands on her hips. Sirius rakes his hand down his face and turns to look at Peter. The stress is coming off him in waves.
I hate this,
he says quietly, voice cracking. Peter doesn't voice his unkind thoughts. He pushes them down and squares his shoulders.
We've got to keep it together for Moony. Both of us, but you especially.
He says.
I know that.
Sirius looks away at Remus. He watches him with the girls for a long while, long enough that Peter thinks the conversation is over.
I'm not very good at that,
Sirius says in a soft voice Peter almost doesn't believe is his. This isn't Peter's forte. He doesn't know how to comfort Sirius Black, because Padfoot doesn't need him like that. He needs Peter to be funny, to be a goof, to be the butt of half of his jokes, and a co-conspirator to mischief. He draws in a deep breath, though, because Sirius doesn't need any of those things right now. He needs this.
You're going to be right now.
He tells him, his tone leaving no room for argument.
Moony needs you to. You can do it.
Chapter 7, Remus. After the dust settles and they file out of McGonagall's office, Quidditch practice still happens. Remus sits with Peter and Lily in the stands and they watch in silence. It's not Gryffindor's best showing, and it's clear that Marlene and Sirius aren't working in any semblance of cohesion at all, which frustrates James to no end. Lily keeps her hand on his forearm, though, for the entire hour they're out at the pitch, before James calls a bust. And that's nice. That's a comfort. She isn't scared of him. They wait outside the locker room in silence, too. Remus keeps his hands in his pockets and his head ducked, trying to look small, which is a challenge because he towers over Lily and Peter both. He's glad they aren't trying to keep up a conversation. He doesn't have space in his head for any other thoughts right now but his own racing ones. He says polite hellos to Hammerhead and Gilbert and Metalthroop when they come out together, laughing with each other. He waves at the substitute beaters, who probably should have been on the pitch this evening, though he'd never say that aloud. James and Marlene bang out together, both storm clouds with the rest of the second string.
Waiting on Black.
James says when one of the substitute chasers, Heckham, invites them up to the common room for a round.
Go.
Remus says to him, half pleading with his eyes.
We'll catch up.
James doesn't answer him. He barely looks at him.
All right, I guess we're not waiting on Black.
He says to the group of them.
Up to the tower we go.
Lily and Peter both pause before they follow, but Remus gives them a half smile and shoos them along. When they disappear around the edge of the pitch, he leans against the wall beside the door and lets his guard down for the first time since Marlene said medical condition this afternoon. How stupid was he to think that the only people who would ever figure it out were people who were looking very hard at him. Little things that added up, she said, not knowing those words were going to crush what very little hope Remus had for his own future. Remus wonders if Mum knew this was going to happen, which is why she wanted him to go to the local comprehensive and maybe to university after instead of Hogwarts. She'd fought about it with Dad right up until the night before Remus left on the Hogwarts Express. Mum thinks he's safer with the Muggles, and she's right. They aren't afraid of him. They don't know he's nightmare stuff. Sirius bangs out of the locker room. If Marlene and James were storm clouds, he's a hurricane. He almost misses Remus in his hurry to stalk away, but then he suddenly wheels around as if he can feel him looking at him.
There you are,
He says, relieved.
Where's everyone gone?
Remus nods back toward the castle.
To have a round.
Let's not.
Sirius begs him as Remus pushes himself off the wall and goes to him.
I was going to ask you if we could skip.
He says.
I'm not in a drinking with the mates kind of mood.
He slips his arms around Sirius as soon as he's close enough to reach for him, and he breathes in the smell of him. He doesn't usually shower down here, but he did today, and he doesn't smell right. He smells like James's soap, which is a strange, woodsy smell that Remus thinks is too butch for Sirius, but he'll never say it under pain of death.
Want to go stargazing?
Sirius asks him.
I could use a little time with the universe.
Remus steps back, looking up at the cloudless sky.
All right.
He says,
Over by the standing stones.
It's as far away from the lake as he can get, and away from the usual haunts of sneaking couples in the evening. Sirius links their hands and they walk together, away from the pitch and off the walking path, winding through the grass and over rocks. After a few silent minutes, Sirius lets out a sigh.
I played like shit.
You warned them you would.
Remus points out.
You weren't thinking about Quidditch.
Who fucking cares about Quidditch?
Sirius huffs.
Tonight, who fucking cares?
It's rhetorical, but some bitter, angry part of Remus wants to answer with Potter and McKinnon, because it's the truth, but it's also petty and pathetic and would serve no purpose but to rile Sirius up. Sirius throws himself down into the grass as soon as the standing stones come into sight.
Here all right?
He asks, squirming around and getting comfortable, shoes flat in the grass, knees bent, one hand pillowing the back of his head. Remus laughs softly and sinks into the grass on his knees in the V of Sirius's spread legs. He leans over him, palms on the grass on either side of his shoulders, not quite laying on him, but a near thing. Sirius reaches up, his palm cupping the side of his neck, thumb against the line of his jaw.
Are you good?
Sirius asks. Remus nods, ducking to land a kiss on Sirius's face. He gets his eyebrow, which would be a laugh and a tumble in the grass any other day, but not today.
As good as I can be.
He says,
It's been a long 2 days.
It's been a long April.
Remus hums in agreement. He leans forward again, ignoring the awkward angle, and noses at Sirius's cheek.
I'm glad you're not panicking.
Sirius laughs and pulls Remus down into the grass beside him.
I'm absolutely panicking, Moony. I'm working on our escape plan as we speak.
Oh, where are we going?
Remus settles beside him, looking up at the stars.
Canada, I think.
Sirius sighs.
Montreal has a nice wizarding district. Toronto's all right.
Remus turns and takes in his face. He's stressed. Remus can see that as plain as he can see his wind-bitten lips and the slope of his nose.
Canada sounds nice.
He says,
Liberal policies, too.
Basic human rights, you mean?
Sirius turns onto his back and huffs out a breath. Remus watches him watch the stars.
You wouldn't go, though?
No.
Remus agrees.
I wouldn't.
Sirius turns his head toward him.
What if I just took off for Caracas or something? That's just it. You'd stay in Wales. We'd owl sometimes.
Remus brushes his fingers across Sirius's cheek. He looks frightened, and Remus knows it's not about Marlene or Lily or James. This one's about him.
If I thought you actually wanted to move to Caracas, or Berlin, or to Montreal, I'd follow you. Of course I'd go with you. But our lives are here. Our friends are here. Everything and everyone we love is here.
We could start over, you know. Both of us.
Sirius turns back to the stars.
No baggage, no registry.
I don't think we'd do well on our own. You need prongs. I need my mum, as pathetic as that sounds.
Remus wiggles closer until they're pressed together, arm against arm.
It's not pathetic.
Sirius's cheeks pink.
I've only recently got a mum, and I'm beginning to see the appeal.
Remus laughs again.
Well, then the Americas are out. Euphemia wouldn't stand for an ocean between you and her.
Like Hope wouldn't wring my neck for suggesting you abscond to the Americas. That knocks out Australia too.
Sirius pauses to think for a moment.
Honestly, Padfoot couldn't take a kangaroo. Australia's out for other reasons.
Well, you see, we live here, and we're going to keep living here.
Remus sucks in a breath of Scottish spring air. It tastes like home.
I'm not letting bigots run me out of my country, Sirius. I'm not.
Sirius turns over onto his side and gropes for his hand. He links their fingers and squeezes. The pressure feels good. It's comforting, and it soothes some of the worry in Remus's own head.
I'd never let them, you know.
He knows why they're out on the grounds and not up in the tower, but he wishes they were. He feels safer bundled in Sirius's bed, surrounded by pillows and the comforting smells of both of them on the sheets.
Do you think she's not the only one?
He asks, finally, even though the thought has been pushing its way into the front of his mind for hours.
How many other people just know and haven't said anything?
There's a long moment of silence. Remus starts to worry that Sirius is compiling a list in his head, but when he looks over at him, he's staring back up at the sky, mouthing a silent prayer. He likes it better when Sirius says them aloud, softly chanting words that had been passed down the Black family line for hundreds of years until they found their way onto Sirius's tongue. Remus curls towards him, squeezing his fingers, and Sirius breaks his eyes away from the sky, lips still parted.
You are panicked.
Remus says.
I'm absolutely terrified.
Sirius admits, his eyes are watering a little.
I know it's not my fault. I know it isn't. But I can't stop thinking that it is. She's my friend.
But she's Remus's friend, too. Because, yeah, he doesn't really spend any time with McKinnon without Sirius, but Sirius spends more time on Quidditch than he does on homework, and Marlene is half of his pair, and Remus spends all of his time orbiting around Sirius. There's a metaphor in there, where he's the moon and Sirius is the sun, and it's poetic and probably beautiful, but Remus's whole mind is a mess from the last 2 days, and that's on top of the mess from the last 3 weeks. He's finding it hard to think in anything but fragments, though. He isn't breathing easy either. He thought he'd be okay when Sirius asked him to stay outside. They weren't going to the lake. He can't hear the water lapping at the rocks. He can't smell the algae. And he's been better anyway. He's gone down to the lake twice this term, and he didn't puke either time. He can sit outside like a normal person and look up at the stars with his boyfriend without his brain turning on him. He can. He sits outside with Sirius all the time. But Sirius looks like he's about to cry, and everything that they'd put to rest has come back to the surface again, 18 months later. It feels like it happened yesterday, somehow. He wishes they were in the tower. He wishes he weren't a monster. He wishes Prongs found the note before he ever did. He wishes his father had a heart, and he wishes James was speaking to him. He wishes McGonagall had taken pity on him while he was dry heaving on the floor of the hospital wing and obliviated him like he begged her to between his sobs. He blinks the past out of his eyes and looks into Sirius's scared face, gasping in a breath he didn't realize he hadn't taken. He thinks Sirius might have been calling his name.
Sorry,
he says, embarrassed. He leans in and hides his face in Sirius's jumper.
Where'd you just go?
Sirius asks him, voice trembling a little. Remus shakes his head.
It's been a long April. Padfoot.
He tells him instead of the truth.
Can we please go inside? I'm tired.
Yes, Merlin, yes, anything you need.
Sirius untangles them and pulls them both up to their feet. He looks accusingly up at the sky, as though whatever's happening can be blamed on the waxing moon, and that's not fair. Sirius used to love the moon. Remus used to wake up to him cross-legged on the floor 6 times a month, a tiny little first year with his pentacle and his ritual book open in front of him, never stumbling over the words, but sometimes forgetting them. He'd kiss the pentacle and whisper,
Good morning, Sol. Good night, Loon.
And spring to his feet with a toothy grin, ready for whatever mischief they found themselves in that day. Then came the summer, and them figuring him out, and the next year, Sirius only opened his ritual book on the morning after the new moon. Remus took that from him. Half of his faith, he just stole it. He just kept taking, year after year. He walks back to the castle with his hand in Sirius's and terror ringing in his head. He gets changed for bed thinking about the constant fear Sirius lives with, that Remus will be outed and ruined, and Sirius will be powerless to stop it. He gets under the duvet with Sirius's arms around him, holding back tears, thinking about Padfoot and the wolf, the danger that's there, how Sirius plans to put himself in danger every month for the rest of their lives. Sirius falls asleep, but Remus can't. He can't settle. He can't breathe right. Sirius was afraid of his friends tonight because of Remus. He knows Sirius wants to protect him, but Remus wants to protect Sirius too. That's hard when he's the one doing the hurting. He slides out of Sirius's arms and gets out of bed. He stands in the middle of the floor of the dorm, looking at Prong's closed curtains and furiously hating himself. Prongs is angry at him. They aren't speaking. Even tonight, in McGonagall's office, James hadn't said a word directly to him. Remus needs him. He feels like his head is going to explode. The curtain isn't hexed closed. It pulls back without resistance. James blinks up at him from behind his glasses, still awake with a Martin Miggs comic in his hands.
Come to pay the pot.
He asks. Remus bursts into tears.
I need to break up with Sirius.
He says, around his sobs. James throws his comic to the foot of the bed, grabs Remus by the arm, and yanks him into the bed. The silencio he throws at the curtains is so strong it actually makes them shake.
What?
James shouts at him. Remus cries harder. He shakes his head.
I'm ruining his life.
Comes out of him in broken pieces, but he thinks James hears him from the look on his face.
That's nonsense.
James grabs his arms and stares at him, gobsmacked while he cries.
That's just not true, and you know it.
Remus doesn't say anything. He can't get words out. He can't get enough breath in his lungs, and his head is on fire. Sirius loves him. That's a fact. He knows it. Sirius is the best thing that's ever happened to him. That's also true. But loving Remus, that's a prison sentence. It's being locked up in a cycle of fear and pain that never ever stops. He can't let Sirius spend the rest of his life inside of that. Not Sirius. He can't let his light go out. He tries to say all this to James once he gets enough breath to speak. He knows he sounds a mess, that his words are disjointed and don't form sentences that mean anything. James is quiet, letting him speak, not running over his sobbed-out words with objections. He runs out of words around when he runs out of sobs, so worn out by crying that his stomach muscles feel cramped and his head aches like it's the night before the moon. James still has a hold on his arms, and it might be the only thing grounding him to the earth. He watches Remus, unblinking, for long enough that Remus starts to feel itchy. He wants to go now that he's said it and made the thoughts real. He'll go to sleep in his own bed where the sheets smell like no one, not even him.
None of that is right.
James eventually blurts out. Remus shakes his head.
I watched it happen. He used to be happy.
If you think he isn't happy with you, I don't know what you think happiness is.
James shifts up onto his knees, still clutching Remus's arms like he'll do a runner if he lets go. Remus might. That's a fair guess.
You think he'll be doing better without you? Really, Mooney?
Yes.
He stops, shuddering around a deep breath.
He was scared to death of his friends today, and that's because of me.
No.
James says.
That's for you, and that wouldn't change if you break up with him. He'd be more scared, Remus.
James lets out a little frustrated huff.
He's always been a crier. You don't get to take credit for that. He just used to cry on me back then. He needed to peacock around you, to try to impress you.
Remus sniffles.
I'm sorry.
James chews on his lip and meets Remus's gaze.
This is because of what I said to you, isn't it? I didn't mean it like that, Mooney. It was just supposed to be some shite to make you leave me alone. Please. You love him. He loves you. You're the best thing in his life. He says it all the time. He can't wait to call you husband. He's a big girl about it. You're going to forget you have a name. He's going to say it so much.
James finally lets go of his arms, and Remus curls himself up, knees to his chest, arms locked around his legs. James lets out another frustrated sound from low in his throat.
I'll kill McKinnon, if it'll make this stop.
It's not her. It isn't you either.
Remus rests his chin on his knees and looks miserably at a spot on James's headboard rather than looking at his face.
He said that he can't wait to call me husband.
Merlin. Yes, I told you. He's a gigantic girl. He's fantasizing about buying a house near your mum and doing crosswords with you in the solarium.
James sounds desperate.
You need to put these thoughts out of your head. It's nonsense, Mooney. Utter nonsense. What happened?
Remus wipes his cheeks.
He was praying.
He prays all the time. He prayed yesterday, and you didn't try to break up with him.
James pauses.
I mean, you haven't suddenly gone all anti-pagan or something, have you? Because that would explain the punching.
He was praying to the moon.
Remus clarifies, ignoring him.
And I haven't seen him. He hasn't done that.
He starts to breathe hard again.
That's important to him, and he hasn't. Since me and everything. I've just made his life so hard.
Oh, Merlin.
James scrambles toward him on the sheets and pulls him into a hug.
You aren't responsible for his prayer schedule, first of all. And second of all, you've made his life his. He was going to end up in some arranged, loveless marriage, and...
James bites down on his lip.
Given what I know now, I think he mightn't have even made it that far.
I owe the pot.
Remus says, desperately needing to change the subject away from that and get this off his chest, too.
I'm sorry, Prongs. I shouldn't have beat on you like that. It wasn't fair.
Yeah, you shouldn't have.
James agrees.
McGonagall read me the riot act this afternoon before our knitting circle meeting. It made me think, and I'm sorry too, because some of this is my fault. I'm probably not helping by dragging it all back up.
Which is true to a degree, but it didn't start there. Remus can track it back, all the way to his dad in the kitchen on the first day of spring break. That's what made everything start tumbling back over. A lifetime ago, 3 weeks ago, it felt like both at the same time.
Don't break up with Sirius.
James orders.
And talk to someone when you're feeling this way. Him or me or Peter, I suppose, if you must.
I'm not talking to Peter about my feelings.
Remus pulls back from James and wipes at his face again.
And I came here, didn't I? Even though we weren't speaking.
Pull your punches next time you git.
James squeezes his shoulder.
We're always speaking if you need me.
Chapter 8, Sirius. He wakes up slowly on Saturday morning. Mooney's hand is stuffed up under his shirt, palm against his chest. Sirius blinks his eyes open to Mooney's sleeping face, which is his favorite thing to wake up to. He rests there for a while, against his pillow with his eyes half-lidded, taking in Mooney's hair flopping over his eyes, and the bump at the bridge of his nose, and the way his eyelashes flutter while he dreams. Sirius used to dream about this. Before, every night was a new Mooney dream, and every morning was a sad disappointment when he woke up alone. He wakes up to Mooney's sleepy face nearly every day now, and will for the rest of forever. Blacks didn't, by and large, put any stock in the concepts of love and soulmates, but Sirius knows without a doubt that the universe built them both out of the same stardust. He feels better in the light of a new day. He hopes Remus feels better. McKinnon isn't a bad person. She feels terrible about what she did. She won't do it again. She made that promise to them both. She privately offered him an unbreakable vow in the showers after practice. He said no. Sirius thinks it's personal growth that he didn't jump on it and make her do it. He'll trust her. He doesn't need her life on the line for that. Some people will find out. He has to be okay with that. They have things to do today, he thinks to himself as the shadows from his dreams clear out of his head. He pushes Mooney's hair out of his face gently, leans forward and presses his lips against his forehead, then the bridge of his nose, then his lips. Mooney stirs, grumbling sleepily. His fingers curl against Sirius's skin under his shirt.
Morning, Mooney.
Sirius says against his ear, wriggling closer to him. Mooney mutters something that sounds like mourning, lost in a yawn and the sleep-thick rumble of his voice. Sirius smiles into his neck. When they're married, they're going to have one of those charmed teapots, the kind that starts on its own every morning, so Mooney'll never have to wait to have his morning tea again. The hand under Sirius's shirt creeps up and up until Remus has his fingers tangled in the ends of Sirius's hair, and Sirius feels caught in the best way, trapped against his fiancée and warm in bed. He leaves kisses against the line of Mooney's neck until Mooney starts to shift away from him.
I need to tell you something,
Remus says, sounding worried. Sirius pulls back reluctantly. Mooney doesn't move his arm, still trapped under Sirius's shirt, and that's all right. That's nice. He wishes they weren't wearing any clothes, actually, and not in a sex way, just in a contact way. Curling close, skin to skin, makes Sirius's heart feel so full he thinks it might burst sometimes. He rests his head back on the pillow and watches Mooney watch him, idly stroking his fingers against Sirius's jaw.
What is it?
Sirius prompts him when the silence stretches on for too long. Remus opens his mouth and then closes it again, his fingers still. He smiles at Sirius, one of his sad ones, and Sirius braces himself.
You aren't allowed to panic.
Remus says,
All right, so I won't.
Sirius promises. That earns him a doubtful look, but Mooney's fingers start stroking again, and he takes a breath.
I wasn't doing very well last night after you fell asleep.
He says, gaze aimed somewhere in the region of Sirius's lips rather than his eyes.
I'm telling you this because I told Prongs, and I don't want you to be blindsided if he says something about it.
Sirius reaches out and touches Mooney's chin.
About me.
Yeah, but not that.
He ducks and kisses Sirius's fingertips.
I said I thought I was ruining your life.
He promised not to panic, and that promise is the only thing that keeps him from losing his mind. He pulls Mooney close, though, rougher than he might have otherwise.
You aren't.
He says,
Felt like it yesterday.
Mooney says into his chest.
I told him, and I'm not serious. Don't panic. I told him I needed to break up with you, which I'm not doing, to be clear.
He feels very cold. He swallows around the lump that's formed in his throat and tries to take in a breath. Not today. Not this, and not today of all days.
You aren't.
He says again, less sure this time.
I'm not. I said I'm not.
Remus peeks up at him.
I just got caught up in a lot of terrible thoughts and I was scared. I want you to know. I don't want to keep it from you.
Sirius forces himself to relax. He's not going to panic. He made a promise. He does pull Mooney closer, though, which means he's squashing poor Mooney's arm between them. But he needs the contact. He needs to keep him close and tight. Mooney lets himself be squished against him for a while. His fingers are still stroking along Sirius's jaw, and all this is good. All this means Mooney is staying right there, where he belongs.
I love you.
Sirius says after a while.
You aren't ruining my life.
I know.
Mooney squirms up so they're face to face. He doesn't try to get away. He almost manages to get closer, even as Sirius's shirt gets rucked up and tangled over his arm.
I need you to be happy and safe, and sometimes I think I'm getting in the way. The wolf
is a part of you.
Is a curse, Sirius, a literal curse.
Not to me. 4 days a month you need me to help you. That's not a curse. That's just life, Mooney. Sometimes people need help.
Sirius closes his eyes and takes in a breath.
For a while, you were the only reason I wanted to keep going at all. And that was. McGonagall said that wasn't good, but it was a reason. And I needed a reason.
He opens his eyes again, having found the place inside himself where he stores his courage.
I needed you to keep me together, and you did. And if I needed it again, you'd do it without question. You need me sometimes. I love you. I'll take care of you when you need it. I'll protect you when I have to. That isn't ruining my life, Remus. That isn't making me unsafe or unhappy.
I don't want you to go through life afraid because of me.
Sirius's heart breaks in his chest.
Remus,
he says, soft and quiet.
Worrying about you is part of loving you, and I'm never going to stop loving you. Not until the last star in the sky goes out. Maybe not even then.
Remus's fingertips dig into his jaw.
Oh,
he says, a half-broken gasp. Sirius pitches forward and kisses him on the lips, frantically trying to say everything he wants to with his lips and his tongue instead of his words. He's out of words. Maybe later he'll have more, but now all he has is this, and Mooney takes it and takes him and kisses back like he'll die if he doesn't. They stay like that for a long time, until Remus wiggles away to get up and use the loo. Sirius lays there for a while longer, arm thrown over his eyes, and wonders how much longer they'll have to muck through the shit before the past stops creeping into the present and knocking them flat. He'll take the punishment, though. He will, because at the end of this dark path is the future, the rest of their life sprawling out an unmapped, untamed wilderness, soaked in starlight. They'll draw the borders, him and Mooney together, and build their own castle in the moonlight, made up of memories instead of rooms. They'll fill the place with more love than Sirius thought possible to have for a very long time. Sirius throws the duvet off himself and pulls himself up from bed. Mooney needs a cup of tea, and they both need a shower, and today he has to go to Hogsmeade and get Mooney's ring from Theodore Wigby. He touches his pentacle as he passes his bedside table and says a quick, silent prayer, like he does every day before he taps the kettle on the wood stove to start Mooney's tea. James finds his balls and finally corners him to talk while Sirius is getting ready to go to Hogsmeade. Sirius knows it's coming. He's glad Mooney gave him a warning. Prongs isn't famous for his discretion, and if Sirius got a talking to that started with Mooney wants to dump you, he would have gone to straight panic and run for the hills.
What are you doing for Beltane?
James asks, which throws him, because that's not what he was expecting at all.
Nothing.
Sirius answers.
Recovering from Quidditch.
James stares at him, looking troubled and chewing on his lip.
We should do something.
Genuinely, Sirius was expecting a conversation about Remus, not Prongs suddenly being interested in holidays, which he barely celebrates at all anyway. The Potters are, in the words of Grandfather Pollux, half-hearted, which Sirius supposes is an insult, but seems to just mean they aren't up their own arses about rites and rituals.
Where is this coming from?
Sirius asks because he feels like he's been confounded. James looks suspiciously around at the empty dorm. Peter's already gone. Remus is tutoring some third year in the common room. They're alone, so he's not sure what the secrecy is about.
Remus thinks you've given up on Loon,
He says,
and he thinks that's his fault. And listening to him cry about how he's stolen the moon from you was actually heartbreaking, Sirius. So we should light something on fire on Beltane to make him feel better.
Ah,
he thinks,
there it is.
it's still out of left field. He doesn't understand how Remus got there, even in whatever kind of spiral of negative thoughts he found himself in the night before. Sirius understands better than most people that bad thoughts don't always make sense and they can come from nowhere. Still, Remus knows he can ask Sirius anything, and Sirius will always answer.
I haven't. He thinks that. Did he tell you why?
James shakes his head.
He wasn't really forming sentences at the time, Sirius, and I was very busy trying to distract him from something.
Sirius steels himself.
From dumping me, you mean?
He says, trying to sound casual.
He didn't.
James looks furious and terrified, torn between the two.
He said he wouldn't.
Sirius pinches the bridge of his nose. Prongs has 3 brain cells some days, he swears.
Do you think I'd be standing here fiddling with my hair if he dumped me?
No, you'd be catatonic. He told you.
He tells me everything eventually.
Sirius says. James watches him, staring critically at Sirius as though he's looking for evidence that Sirius is actually okay.
He didn't tell me about me stealing the moon yet, though.
Well, you've threatened to blow it up often enough that it does start to paint a picture.
James points out.
I don't like when he's hurt. If it would stop insisting on getting full, I'd stop threatening to blow it up.
He sighs.
Why would that bother him so much?
He gives up on his hair. It's not cooperating, and it's half up in a bun, and he's distracted by James anyway.
I think an adversarial relationship with their god might be frowned upon.
James guesses.
That sounds boring.
Sirius peers in the mirror, frowning. He's getting a spot. Too much stress.
I should probably read a book on Christianity before I put my foot in my mouth one day. I only barely know about Christmas, and I doubt that's the whole picture.
We could ask Peter.
Sirius glances over at him.
Has Peter ever actually been in a church?
Well, possibly no.
James admits.
But it's a place to start. That's not my girlfriend or your fiancé, so we won't feel ridiculous if we ask him.
Could do, but they also have these pieces of paper with writing on them, and sometimes they put them together, and then they bind them up in leaf.
James throws a pillow at him, which he catches.
You're in a good mood, considering.
Sirius grins, clutching the pillow in both hands.
A good mood, full stop.
He looks back up at the mirror and his stupid hair and the spot blooming on his chin.
I'm going to pick up the ring today.
James's eyes go wide behind his glasses and his face splits into a grin.
Today. It's finally happening. Ring day.
Sirius shakes his head.
Not today. Maybe tomorrow. But I'll have it, is the point. And I'll be able to see it for myself.
It'll be better to see it on his hand, wouldn't it? Just do it today.
James comes over to him and throws an arm around his shoulder.
Have you asked Dad to get one of the family rings out of the vault for your own hand yet?
Sirius shakes his head again, which makes James roll his eyes.
It's not for the reason you think it is.
Sirius tells him.
We're a gold family.
James barrels on without paying him any mind.
I think there's probably some Peveril silver down there, though, and you've got a Peveril-y look about you. But your watch is gold, and they should match.
Potter.
Sirius barks, cutting him off.
I want to see if Remus wants to get me a ring, and maybe discuss the kind of wedding he'd like to have before I go full pure blood psychosis, and plan all 7 celebrations without asking if he'd like that.
He flicks James in the cheek.
You should take notes.
Well, the 7th one is the only one that matters. Everyone likes weddings.
He pauses, thoughtful.
Would you be fine with it if he didn't want any of the pomp?
Yeah,
Sirius says. He knows he's got a dopey look on his face.
I'm fine with whatever he wants to do. I'm glad Dad sent me the gold. I wouldn't have asked, and I was bothered that I couldn't give him a proper engagement ring, but even if he hadn't, I'd have got over it. It's him and me together that matters, however we get there.
He meets James's eyes. James is near tears because James is a sucker for anyone's love, but especially Sirius's. It used to annoy him because he thought it was pity. He knows better now. James Potter is a hopeless romantic. He loves love and he loves Sirius, so it follows that the effects compound. He almost feels sorry for Evans, who's going to have to deal with his weepy arse unless and until she dumps him.
Well,
James says, all business now, even though he's sniffling.
Let's get you to Hogsmeade then, if there's a ring on the line.
Sirius hits him in the shoulder.
I'm dragging him to the solicitor first.
He says,
I've got to sell the house, and I'm putting him on the accounts.
James snorts.
Better you than me, mate. He's too proud to take your money.
It's not my money, it's our money, his and mine, together.
He knows he sounds frustrated, but he's annoyed by this back and forth of theirs. It's the closest they've come to an actual fight in a long time.
All right. You don't need to convince me. I'd be happy to live off your fortune and do nothing for the rest of my life.
Sirius laughs.
You don't need Alphard's money for being a wastrel. You'll do that easily enough in the Potter Vault.
With Lily,
he says happily. The door opens and Remus pokes his head in.
I'm ready when you are, Padfoot,
he says, smiling at him. He looks better. He looks good, actually, and Sirius wonders if maybe he just needed to let it all out or if he's buttoned it all back up inside. With Remus, it's one or the other. Sirius looks at himself one more time in the mirror. He doesn't think he looks very grown, actually, but he looks like the man Remus loves, and today, that's all he needs to be. Well, he thinks to himself as he pulls on his robe. He does need to be one more thing, up to no good. Sirius claps James on the shoulder and flashes him a sharp grin.
I've been waiting for this moment since the first time you gagged at me and Remus for kissing.
He says giddy.
Revenge is a beautiful, heartless harpy, Potter. Enjoy your date with Evans while you can. I'll see you later. That's a promise.
Chapter 9, Remus. Remus feels so much lighter after their talk. He's still worried about half the school knowing, and he's always going to be worried about Sirius. But this morning he opened his eyes to Sirius's handsome face, open and happy, and eyes really sparkling for the first time in weeks. He loves this man. He'd do anything for him. Sirius chose him and he keeps choosing him, even though Sirius Black could have his pick of anyone in Hogwarts if he wanted. He doesn't. He just wants a half-Welsh werewolf with a ridiculous nose. Ignoring Sirius's choices is the sort of thing McGonagall's given him excerpts from psychology books on. She'd frown at him with scowly lips if she knew. And it's Sirius. He endured his own supernova already and came through it stronger than he was before. He thinks about how wrapped up they are in each other all the time, how he knew so long ago that Sirius was the beginning and the end of his love story, how Sirius is so willing to take Remus by the hand and run until they find a place they can be themselves. Sirius learned how to turn into Padfoot for him, and Remus isn't stupid. He's not a fool. He knows that Sirius got interested in healing because he wants to be able to patch him up after bad moons, as few and far between as they've been since the Animadry. He found a passion in it, but Remus knows that's how it started. Remus knows a bad thought from a good one. He isn't ruining Sirius's life. They're building a life together. That's hard, uncomfortable work, especially when one of those people is Sirius Black, who has no context for a life where people don't hand you everything on a silver platter. He's learning. They're learning together. They'll map this path like they've mapped all the others. They walk the road to Hogsmeade together, Sirius bouncing his way down the pebble-covered path, and Remus trailing behind him, more sedate. Sirius stops and turns to look at him, holding out both his hands. Remus shakes his head, laughing, and grabs Sirius's right hand with his left.
Maybe I wanted to do a jig.
Sirius says, walking backward, pulling Remus along the path.
It's a nice day for a dance.
It's been so long since they've felt normal. It almost puts Remus on edge to hear the happiness leaking out of Sirius's words.
Maybe I wanted to come to Hogsmeade at noon like a normal person.
Remus says.
I could have done another hour of tutoring. McCoy is going to fail history.
Sirius stops in the path and looks up at him.
History? Is that even possible?
Binns gave him poor marks on his last paper, he said.
I think McCoy just wanted to spend time with my prefect.
Sirius teases.
You're my prefect, Moony. I've been distracted. My subjects are forgetting. I'll remind them.
Remus rolls his eyes, takes 2 steps forward, and pulls Sirius into his arms.
McCoy is a third year, Sirius. I think you're safe.
That's hardly the point. There's 5ths and 7ths to worry about, and Peter's a free agent. Merlin knows what dirty thoughts he's harboring.
That pulls a laugh out of him, a good long laugh that leaves him leaning against Sirius, shaking with it.
Peter,
he gasps out.
You think I'd go from you, Sirius Black, the best-looking boy in Hogwarts, to Peter Pettigrew?
He feels Sirius puff his chest out.
You think I'm the best-looking boy at Hogwarts?
I know it.
He kisses Sirius's cheek as he pulls away and takes his hand again. They start back down the path again, hand in hand this time.
What's the rush, anyway?
Remus asks after a few quiet minutes.
We have an appointment.
Sirius answers. He swings their arms back and forth, and another smile tugs at Remus's lips.
I don't think the pub takes appointments.
Sirius laughs.
Well, no, but Rosmerta would save us a table if we asked, I bet. I've made an appointment with our solicitor, and she's cross about having to come in on a Saturday, so we're doing it over brunch.
Remus comes to a stop again, reeling Sirius in to stop in front of him.
Our solicitor?
He echoes. Sirius nods.
We've got to deal with the estate,
He says.
and we've got some papers to sign, and she's had a copy of the Gringotts key made for you, and we've got to pick that up from her.
Remus glares up at the cloudless sky for a moment, and then looks back at his beautiful, stupid boyfriend.
Sirius.
Remus,
He steps closer into Remus's space.
I'm afraid I've decided I'm not going to have an argument about this.
He ducks and gives him a ghost of a kiss, light and soft, their lips barely touching.
If you try, I'll ignore you, and then you'll be cross, but you'll still have a key to our vault.
Sirius.
Sirius steps back and pulls Remus forward.
We have an appointment, Remus,
He says sing-song.
and we're not having an argument, la la la.
He caves.
Fine.
He sighs. It's pointless fighting it. They're getting married. Their lives are going to be twined up together into a single life. They're not going to have separate vaults. Sirius is annoyingly right about this. He'll figure out how to add Sirius to his sad and empty savings account. That's fairness, and it would make Sirius unreasonably happy, even though Remus is sure he's barely got 10 pounds in it. Then again, Mrs. Marsh at the bank would give him a scowl for adding a man to his account, and the rumors would start. He's already the center of enough rumors in town. It might be worth some rumors to see the look on Sirius's face.
I thought we were just going to follow Prongs around and make his life terrible.
Remus says as they pass by the Three Broomsticks, which is absolutely where James Potter thinks a good day in Hogsmeade begins and ends. He knows this because it's what Sirius thinks, and James has no context for romance except for them and Peter's dozens of tries at groping a pair of tits. Peter is not a positive example. Neither are they, when he thinks about it. He and Sirius have always been wrapped up in each other. Dating never really happened. He wonders if that's odd, if that's something he should miss, but he doesn't. He didn't need to try Sirius out before sorting out that he wanted him forever. That struck him in the middle of a midnight run to the kitchens near the end of third year, a year before he worked up the nerve to even kiss him. He was wedged between Sirius and a suit of armor, trying to stay silent under the invisibility cloak. He breathed in the citrusy smell of Sirius's ridiculous washing potion, and Sirius's hair brushed against his cheek, and he thought, I'm done for. It's him or it's nothing. He'd had a feeling for a long time before that, but that was the moment he knew. That feeling echoes in him again when Sirius turns to him with sparkling eyes and a toothy grin and reaches for him.
Nope,
Sirius says, leaning in close to kiss him again.
we're going to let Prongs sweat.
Because of brunch.
Sirius sighs and pulls back, mocking despair ruined by the sparkle in his eyes.
Because of brunch. Being a rich bastard is hard, Mooney.
He tells him,
Sacrifices must be made. We'll catch up to him after we're done with Belinda and the errands.
There's errands too. I thought this was a Hogsmeade weekend, not a field trip into adulthood.
I'm sorry, but it's both today.
Sirius says,
I need to refill my potions kit, and you need new quills so you stop stealing all of mine. Our sweet stash is nearly empty, which is a crime against wizard kind. And then I've got a package to pick up.
Blush rises high on his cheeks. Remus feels his heart stutter in his chest.
Is the package ring-shaped?
Might be.
Sirius admits, flush spreading across the bridge of his nose. Remus watches Sirius for a moment, standing there in the middle of the Hogsmeade High Street, his hair's tied back in a messy bun, half of his curls hanging loose and wild around his face. His lips are chapped, and he's got a spot on his chin. His robe's askew over an ill-fitting jumper that Remus is certain used to be his. He's the best thing Remus has ever looked at. He feels like a fool for last night.
I'm never breaking up with you.
He declares. Sirius isn't privy to Remus's internal monologue, so he scrunches his nose in confusion.
You did already say.
He says,
Was that still on the table?
No,
Remus says decisively. He reaches out and takes Sirius's hand.
but I've realized just now that I'm an idiot for even thinking it.
Sirius shakes his head.
You aren't an idiot.
Remus leans in and kisses him.
It's you or it's nothing.
He says when he pulls away,
We're going to be late for your solicitor.
Our solicitor?
Sirius corrects him. He presses a finger against Remus's lips.
What's mine is yours, Lupin.
What's the big to-do about me using our quills, then?
He asks, and dances out of reach as Sirius tries to grab for him again. Remus isn't allowed to go into Wigby's foundry with Sirius. He's insistent that he goes alone, so Remus lets him, even though Remus thinks it's ridiculous. Sirius already did the asking and has been calling him fiancé for 2 months now. He's aware there's parts of this he doesn't understand, but to him, after the asking is too late to hide an engagement ring, he only knows the skeletons of the very old pure-blood traditions at play, but he's sure there's something he's missing. Remus is a half-blood. He doesn't have a huge, sprawling tapestry with every name of everyone who's ever lived on it. He doesn't have 1,000 years of traditions and ancient magic on his shoulders, weighing him down. Sirius does, though. He hates the Black family. He doesn't hate being a wizard. He doesn't even hate being a pure blood. He cherishes parts of the things Walburga and Orion beat into his head. Remus knows those things keep him grounded, help him feel like he isn't lost at sea. He belongs somewhere, and marriage is one of those very important things. Remus never dreamt of getting married. He never thought to hope anyone would want to marry him. Padfoot can have whatever he needs. Remus only needs Sirius. The rest is just decoration. Sirius is inside long enough that Remus starts to feel twitchy, alone in the road. Wigby's place is at the edge of the village, out by the wild fields that bleed into the forest, and it's creepy, alone with just birdsong and tall grass. It's a long 10 minutes that he waits, but it's only 10 minutes. He checks his watch enough to know. Sirius bangs his way out of the door, thanking Wigby as he lets the screen slam shut behind him. He turns to Remus, clutching a tiny wooden box in his hands. He's pale and nervous in a way Remus didn't expect.
All right, Padfoot.
Good,
He says.
Grand, everything's lovely.
He looks up at Remus with wide eyes.
That's the errand's done, I guess.
Remus is definitely missing something. Prongs isn't around to ask, though, so Remus does what he knows, the tradition of more common men. He takes Sirius by the hand and drags him to the 3 broomsticks, where he'll buy him a drink and do his best to remind Sirius that it's 1977 and not the year 800, and Remus has already been asked to marry him. Or, failing that, get him drunk.
Sit.
He tells Sirius when he finds them a table. Sirius does, silently clutching onto the box in his hand.
Whiskey or ale?
Ale.
Sirius answers. He looks up at Remus.
Rosmerta wouldn't give me a whiskey and send me back to Hogwarts.
Rosmerta will take one look at you and give you the bottle. You look like you're going to pass out.
He pushes a loose curl behind Sirius's ear.
I've been waiting for that ring, you know. You don't have to be frightened.
I'm not frightened.
Sirius lies.
All right.
Remus rolls his eyes as he drops a kiss onto the top of Sirius's head.
I'm getting us around.
If you see Prongs, waggle your eyebrows at him.
Sirius calls after him as he starts towards the bar. Remus turns.
Waggle my eyebrows.
He asks, incredulous.
Have you gone completely soft?
Sirius's face transforms into outrage. He goes to stand but thinks better of it. Remus is secretly grateful. The pub is full and they'd lose the table if Sirius left it for mischief.
Bring me my pint.
Sirius says imperiously, waving him toward the bar.
I'll be here plotting.
That, Remus thinks as he weaves through a pack of fourth-year Hufflepuffs arguing over Quidditch, is more like it. Sirius is a worrier, sometimes a literal dog with a bone, and he tends to think himself into spirals. Mischief's a good distraction. It's exactly what they both need right now, to take their minds off of everything that's happened in the last 3 weeks and to put themselves firmly on familiar ground. A little mischief might even lighten Prongs up, who is certainly in his own panic spiral this afternoon, although Remus isn't sure why. Lily kissed him yesterday. The Hogsmeade trip seems like a mere formality. He definitely missed something when he skipped dating, he thinks, as he waves Rosmerta down. He'd fallen in love backward, doing the falling long before any of the kissing.
A cider and a pint of Stormcloud? When you have a moment.
Remus says.
It's for Sirius.
He tosses his head back in Sirius's direction. She glances over his shoulder.
He looks like he's gone 2 rounds with a Bogart,
she says as she tucks 2 glasses under the taps and they start to pour.
We've had a long few weeks, Rosmerta. He could use a little pepping up.
Remus slides 8 sickles across the bar top, which is precisely enough for 2 pints and an ounce of whiskey off the rail. She gives him a weary look, but Rosmerda's a good sport, so he leaves the bar juggling 2-pint glasses and a shot glass filled with old Ogdens. He sets the ale and the shot glass down in front of Sirius, who's managed to put the ring box on the table in front of him. He's looking at it as though it might try to hex him, but it's a step in the right direction, which is towards the ring eventually being on Remus's finger. Sirius looks up at him, surprised.
She gave you whiskey.
Remus sets his cider down and takes his chair. It's his turn to look imperious.
She likes me.
He tells him.
Everyone likes you.
Sirius replies. It's immediate and quite nice to hear, even if it isn't true. Sirius picks up the shot and tosses it back. Remus takes in the long line of his throat and the bob of his Adam's apple, and sort of desperately wishes they took advantage of the empty dorm instead of coming to Hogsmeade, but it's a quick, fleeting thought that's gone before Sirius sets the empty shot glass down on the tabletop.
Can I have my ring yet?
Remus asks him. He leans forward, chin on his fist, and peers at Sirius.
No.
Sirius says,
Oh, so you got it, huh? So that you could stare at it and never put it on my finger.
He's playful with his words, careful, because Sirius is better, but he's still to be handled with care. Remus thinks he probably always will, because Sirius is precious no matter what. Sirius reaches across the table and flicks at his arm.
You were threatening to leave me 4 hours ago. You don't get to make demands on my timeline.
The smile doesn't leave Remus's face because there's no sharp edges on his words. If Padfoot's joking, he's all right.
4 hours ago, I had my tongue down your throat, which is a far cry from leaving.
Well, I don't know how breakups go. I've never had one.
And you never shall,
Remus says. It's light and easy, but it's also a promise.
You still can't have the ring yet, Mooney.
Remus laughs softly.
Damn.
He says,
It was a good try, though, wasn't it?
Sirius looks back down at the ring box and sighs, not answering. Remus doesn't push it. He sips at his cider and looks away from him, giving him the space to stare and fiddle and twitch without being watched. He watches the pub instead. The third years look so small, he thinks. Titchy things. Babies. He feels ancient for a moment, only 4 years older than the youngest of them, but caught up in the strange business of adulthood. There's an engagement ring in the middle of their table. He spent an hour this morning with a solicitor, talking about selling off Sirius's house for Merlin's sake. Their house, Sirius would say, but Remus hasn't ever set foot in it and never would now, so he thinks that's a fair point to stand his ground on. It feels awfully unfair that Sirius has a ring on the table to give to Remus, and Remus has nothing at all to give back. This is Sirius's tradition, though, not Remus's. He isn't even clear on the details of it, other than it was made just for him, from gold given as an engagement gift from father to son. He's so lost in his thoughts, he almost misses Prongs coming in with Lily on his arm. He's glad he doesn't, because there's a single moment before he sees them sitting there with the ring box on the table that he sees pure joy on James's face that's got nothing to do with anyone but Lily Evans. Remus is glad to see it. He always thought they'd make a nice match, if they could get over the Snape-shaped shadow that lingered over them. But then James's eyes light on the ring box in the middle of their table, and that look is replaced by unhinged glee, and he's dragging Lily over, excitedly whispering something into her ear.
Ring,
He says when he reaches them.
I thought you said it wasn't ring day.
Sirius's head snaps up.
It isn't.
He says,
There's a ring. Today is a day. Seems like the perfect time.
I already told you not today.
Today.
James sings.
Come on, do it. There's no reason to not.
Prongs.
Sirius warns.
Padfoot, are you scared of something?
Potter.
Sirius barks.
Keep wagging your tongue and I'll tell Evans every embarrassing thing I know.
James smirks at him.
You are. You're scared. Didn't know Sirius Black was a coward.
Sirius stares at James. James stares at Sirius. Something passes between them that neither Lily nor Remus are privy to, and Sirius drains his ale without breaking his stare. There's something dangerous glinting in his eyes. Remus thinks about what Sirius said this morning. Revenge is a beautiful, heartless harpy, Potter. Remus thought it had been a bluff, a way to make Prongs sweat and to, in Sirius's own way, take his mind off of the Lily Evans part of going to Hogsmeade with Lily Evans. And it might have been, but it isn't anymore. Not in the way Sirius leans forward, eyes still on Prongs. When he speaks to Lily without looking at her.
He wrote an ode to your eyes once, middle of 4th year.
James's own eyes widen.
Did not.
Did so. I have a copy, and the memory to prove it. You did a dramatic reading. You made us all listen. It was not good.
Oh, like you have room to talk about what was going on 4th year. Mooney this and Mooney that. You wrote sonnets.
Remus isn't sure if that was supposed to be a volley back or just a panic-stricken rebuttal. As a volley, it wouldn't work. He's seen the sonnets. There are quite a lot of them, and Sirius is no Shakespeare. Remus plans to keep them forever, so he can look at them when they're old and remember when they were lovesick teenagers who couldn't meet each other's eyes.
I'm off sonnets now, but I can do a nice limerick. I've got one for you. There once was a man from the Hollow.
Padfoot.
You don't get to bother me about my neuroses until you address your own, you utter arse.
Sirius says, crossing his arms.
It isn't ring day today because you've been waiting 3 bloody years for Red over there to say yes to you. So today is yours, you fucking pillock.
James swallows and glances over at Lily, who's watching them with raised eyebrows and a strange look on her face.
3 years.
She asks. He runs a hand through his hair and looks back at Sirius.
That isn't a limerick.
James says weakly.
You're a bastard, you know that. The ode, of all the things.
You've been serious this whole time.
Lily asks him, pulling on his collar to bring his attention back to her.
The whole time.
Well, wait, did you think I was just having you on for years?
James turns to her, confused. Sirius scoops the ring box up and nods towards the door. Remus nods back at him. They both duck out while Prongs and Lily are still wrapped up in each other, spluttering about how long James has held a candle for her.
I don't think that was your original plan.
Remus says as they push their way through the crowd to the door, back out onto the high street.
That could have gone sideways, Padfoot. Very sideways.
It wasn't.
Sirius admits.
I was going to charm his hair pink with little hearts in it. But she likes him, Godric knows why. And Evans is a good sport. She can handle the ode.
Remus shakes his head. He wishes he'd gotten the charmed hair. That's a classic and harmless. Much less of a low blow than the Ode to the Most Beautiful Eyeballs by James Potter, age 14. Maybe that means he's the one who's gone soft. He supposes he's a sucker for love, and he doesn't want James and Lily to lose their chance to feel like he feels all the time. Sirius wouldn't do that, though. Not to James, not after all this time. He's an arse sometimes, but he loves his brother. He looks at Sirius and grins a dopey grin. That's his forever, right there in front of him. Sirius sighs and tucks the ring box into his trouser pocket. He looks up at Remus, sparkling eyes and chapped lips, and a flush across his cheekbones.
So,
he says, kicking out at a stone.
Dorm's empty.
He's woken up by Sirius's lips against his shoulder, insistent sucking kisses that are going to leave a trail of bruises. It's so late, it's early. He can't see the clock, but he can feel it in his bones. Not quite morning. There's no light creeping in through the edges of the bed curtains.
I'm sleeping,
he murmurs.
Wake up,
Sirius says into his skin, soft and cozy and warm. Remus could drift back to sleep again in his arms. He paws at Sirius's hand on his hip, but Sirius shifts and takes his hand away before Remus can grab hold of him.
Let me sleep, Padfoot.
He whines. He hears the click of the ring box closing and his eyes snap open.
Sorry, Mooney.
Sirius whispers. He mouths a kiss against the crook of his neck.
Go back to sleep.
Not a fucking chance,
he says, turning in Sirius's arms so they're facing each other. Sirius chuckles, low and quiet.
You heard that, I suppose.
I thought you were waiting.
Sirius looks away from him, all nervous energy. Remus thinks he mightn't have slept at all.
It's 3 a.m,
he says.
It's tomorrow.
Remus pitches forward and kisses him, gentle because he doesn't want to startle Sirius into being frightened again. He doesn't think he will. His eyes are determined, and the weight of whatever was holding him down is gone. He's loose and open and happy, even if he is anxious. Anxiety is okay. Remus can soothe nerves.
Can I have my ring now?
Remus asks him, pressing his nose against the side of Sirius's cheek and feeling the heat there from Sirius's blush.
Yes,
Sirius answers. He pulls away from Remus and gets himself up, sitting cross-legged, naked, and unashamed of it next to Remus. He fumbles with the box, laughing at his own clumsiness, and flips it open. He looks inside and sighs, then clears his throat.
I love you,
Remus says, reaching out and stroking along the inside of Sirius's thigh.
And I've already said yes, you know.
Sirius gives him a nervous glance.
I I mean, I don't have to, but I'm supposed to ask again.
Purebloods, Remus thinks as he struggles up from the mattress and sits facing Sirius. Ring day, capital letters. He'll write Euphemia and ask for a primer so he knows what he's getting himself into for the rest of this. He reaches out and touches the back of Sirius's hand.
Go on then,
He says. He expects some kind of long, winding speech, filled with whomevers and therefores, but instead Sirius's face just splits into a grin. He holds out the box, lid closed again, in the palm of his outstretched hand.
Marry me.
He asks.
It'll always be yes.
Remus says, snatching up the box. He flips it open. There's a plain gold band polished to a perfect shine nestled in velvet. He reaches out and touches it, its warm, almost leaking heat against his skin. He picks it up and angles it because there's etching inside. Eternum, forever.
It's enchanted.
Sirius says.
Twice, actually. The traditional protection charm and
He turns red again.
a healing charm for the aches and pains.
Sirius takes the ring from him and slips it onto the ring finger of his right hand, his wand hand. Remus closes his eyes as he feels the fizzle of magic rush through him. It feels like Sirius's magic, not some goldsmith's, and he looks up at him with the question on his lips.
They're mine,
He says before Remus can ask.
I cast them before break so they could be set.
Feels like you?
Remus tells him.
It's warm.
Sirius takes Remus's hand in both of his and inspects the ring on his finger. The anxiety on his face is long gone, morphed into pure joy.
Well, it won't fix a broken bone, but it might help with the headaches. You like it.
I love it.
Remus promises.
I love you.
I love you too.
Sirius says.
I meant it, Moony. Until after the last star goes out.
Sirius tugs on his hand and brings them together into a kiss. They don't fall asleep again for a long time until after the sun has crept over the forest. It's Sunday and it's ring day, and Remus thinks they've earned a lie-in. Chapter 10, Minerva. Sunday has long been Minerva's day for herself. Phileas takes Saturday, Pomona takes Friday, Horace takes every bloody day, but Sunday has been hers since she began at Hogwarts. Some weeks she doesn't leave her rooms at all, choosing to stay in and catch up on her journals, tidy her space, meditate, and prepare for whatever the next week will bring her. Usually on the Sunday after a Hogsmeade weekend, she goes to the pub, which is blessedly studentless. Even the sevenths, who can go to the village as they please, avoid it on Sundays after a Hogsmeade weekend. This one isn't an exception. She leaves the castle at noon, taking the leisurely route through the grounds. She knows how to avoid students. Most of them, at least. She spies Black, Potter, Pettigrew, and Lupin out by the willow, which reminds her of her suspicions both that they're up to something on the full moons and that they're screaming idiots about it. If they see her, she doesn't know because she veers away through the edge of the forest and keeps going. The Three Broomsticks is nearly empty when she arrives. Amstead Peabody, Hufflepuff, is having a drink with a woman that Minerva hopes is his mother, based solely on the age difference. She pays Peabody no mind, though, and slides onto a stool at the bar top. Rosmerta gives her a wry grin and sets down a tumbler of whiskey from her personal bottle.
Long week.
She asks her. Minerva nods and sips. This is a tradition now, too many years in the making.
It's spring. The students are restless. 6 fights this week.
Dueling in the corridors is a time-honoured tradition.
Rosmerta says, laughing. She sets a glass of water beside the whiskey.
They're teenagers. They'll sort themselves out.
She hums in assent. That's mostly true. Gordon Fowler had been the worst kind of student, always up to something, and now he's her colleague. 3 floors away, teaching students to dispense of Bogarts. Frank Longbottom joined the Aurors last year, and Minerva spent 7 years wishing he'd just get his head out of his arse. Rosmerta pours herself a drink and sips it.
Besides, it's not all misplaced aggression. Look at Peabody over there with his new lady friend.
Merlin, that's his girlfriend. I thought it was his mother.
Rosmerta laughs again.
He'll move on in a few weeks when the excitement wears off. Teenagers.
Some of them.
Minerva agrees.
Others, not so much. Some of my teenagers are determined to fulfill their familial obligations before they leave Hogwarts.
She takes another deep sip.
If I stumble upon Rosier and Avery again this year, I shall have to kill them.
Or give them a stern lecture on birth control potions.
Rosmerta suggests.
That ought to kill the mood.
It ought to, but it probably won't.
She sighs as Rosmerta refills her tumbler.
I saw Sirius Black with a ring box yesterday.
She says,
If we're speaking of familial obligations.
I certainly don't need to give him a stern lecture on birth control potions.
Maybe one on jumping in with both feet at 17, though.
Minerva waves her off.
You know the old blood. I'm just glad it's for love and not for a dowry.
She sighs.
At this rate, he's going to be my nomination for head boy, since my top two choices have detention for fighting each other.
Lupin and Pettigrew have been fighting.
Lupin and Potter bless all our souls.
She sighs and peers down into her glass.
I've tossed in Lupin's name, but Albus says I should consider Potter, which I think is madness.
She laughs.
Let a Hufflepuff have it, Minerva. It won't be the end of the world.
No, I'm not letting that badge go without a fight.
She drains her drink.
Lupin deserves it. Potter will end up with it. Such is the way of the bloody wizarding world.
Monday dawns too quickly. She has Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw seconds in the morning, which is one of her least favorite classes because Gilderoy Lockhart exists in the world. He's a puffed-up problem at 13, and she can only imagine it's all downhill from here. She's got no patience for wizards who think themselves better than they are. His talent is middling at best. He acts as though he's the greatest wizard to walk the earth. It's one thing, she thinks, for a wizard to be arrogant when he's actually the smartest person in the room. It's another thing entirely when he's arrogant for no reason at all. She has those students, Black and Potter, of course, but Shacklebolt and Gracely too, arrogant about their skill, deservedly so. Minerva supposes they can't all be brilliant. She just wishes the ones who weren't would notice. She takes lunch in the Great Hall, because she needs to speak to another adult, or she'll scream after dealing with 13-year-olds for a double period in the morning. She wants her sevenths on Monday morning, or perhaps a block of firsts, since they're a ruckus, but they're malleable. 13-year-olds are just angst wrapped in skin. Phileas gives her a ribbing for her frustration, but she supposes he's got to deal with Lockhart all the time, and not just for 2 hours every Monday morning. She goes back to her classroom after escaping a near miss, getting roped into a conversation with Horace, who already smells of brandy. He's been trying to get her alone for weeks. Merlin knows why, and she's done an excellent job evading him. The afternoon block is her sixths. She's got a lecture on her lesson plan, but she might feel more like setting them to practice. They're doing a human transfiguration block, too, and she'll find it amusing to watch 3 Animagi try to pretend they aren't as skilled as they are. Sirius is sitting on her desk when she opens the door. Class isn't for an hour, and his boots are on her desk. She almost gives in to the urge to shout at him to get down, but riling him never works the way she wants it to, and she's smarter than to try to get into a war of the wills when she's already off kilter from a bad morning.
I've proposed to Remus.
He says in lieu of a hello.
I thought that happened in February.
She says, dropping a pile of scrolls next to his crossed legs.
Yes, I did the initial asking, but are you a traditionalist, Professor?
I'm a half-blood.
He's too polite to ask the question she answers, but it's the answer he needs.
My father's a muggle. I don't have a clue what the Sacred 28 gets up to.
Well, it's hardly. It's not the 28. It's, well, I suppose it's some of them. The pagan families.
She splays her hands in front of her.
There you are, I'm Protestant.
Something lights in Sirius's eyes, but he squashes it back.
Marriage is the most important ritual,
he says.
It's the joining of two spirits. It's sacred.
As it is for all faiths, I'd think.
She tells him. He inclines his head toward her.
Fair,
he says.
We've got steps, though. A process.
How many steps?
7, but some are multiple parts.
Feels like the cheating way to get to 7.
She points out. He laughs.
It is a bit.
And what step are you on?
1.
He says, half outraged.
I've only just done the asking yesterday.
1, and yet you've asked him twice now.
A process, remember? I did say.
He fiddles with his robes as he talks.
There's asking the parents. Knew that wouldn't go so well, so I skipped it. Call me a coward, but I'm not letting Lyle Lupin stop me. And then the asking of the prospective fiancé, which went well. I got a positive reception.
Sirius grins over at her.
Then there's usually a cooling-off period. A bit of a second courtship. Ours was terrible.
I recall there was a threat of Azkaban.
It's flippant, but it's also a check-in. He was wrecked about it. He barely twitches this time. She's mollified by that.
Yes. I don't think I'd do very well in Azkaban, but that was solved easily enough. It was the other stuff, the his dad hates me parts, the Sirius broke my family up parts.
She arches an eyebrow at him.
You seem to be coping with it.
I'm still sore about it. Lyle's a twat. He said awful things to Mooney.
Minerva remembers. It was only a week ago that they spent hours on the floor in the antechamber behind the great hall. Sirius was trembling. She worried that rejection would be too much and would set him back on a dark path, but he rebounded faster and better than she thought he would be able to. She's proud of him.
You know better than most that you can actually choose your family.
She points out.
Yes, but Mooney loves his dad. Loved. Either way, I don't want to be a wedge. He says he's fine. I've just gone along with him. Hasn't really mentioned him since his mum kicked him out.
Sirius sighs.
I don't. My feelings on that aren't the point.
They're my point, however. How are you both doing with that?
He shrugs. She thinks he looks too calm about it.
He doesn't want to talk about it, so we don't talk about it. When he wants to, I'll listen.
She makes a mental note to bring that up to Lupin at some point.
Anyway,
Sirius says,
we had a rotten second courtship. On Saturday, he tried to dump me.
Minerva knows she looks gobsmacked.
What?
He waves her off.
He didn't mean it. Just worry about his condition, and I think Friday night was just a terrible night all around. I'm sure you can agree. Again, Professor, this isn't my point.
It's entirely the point, Sirius. You're really all right.
He smiles at her. He doesn't look broken up about whatever happened, but Minerva can't always be sure with him. He hides a lot behind a jovial mask often enough.
I'm fine. James talked him down, and then I talked him down, and we've reached an understanding. Nobody's ruining anyone else's life.
She narrows her eyes at him.
Sirius, this sounds like the sort of thing we should be talking about over tea. Do you need...
He shakes his head.
I'm fine. I mean that, Professor. I know I've been a bit needy again, but I think I've got this.
It's not a character defect to need things.
She reminds him, silently cursing Walburga and Orion Black straight to hell where they belong.
So you've told me,
he replies,
and I do need something for you to listen while I tell you this. I had a ring forged. That's traditional, for the asker to make a ring for the ASCII, and I've given it to him, and he said yes again, which means I've gotten properly engaged. How's that for looking forward?
She lets out an exasperated sigh.
It isn't a contest, Sirius,
she tells him. He crosses his arms. She thinks for a moment that he looks very young, but she's spent enough time talking to Sirius Black to know better. He never got to be a child. She suspects that James Potter was the first person to ever make him laugh.
I know it's not,
he says.
I'm just very happy today, and I wanted to tell you.
There's something in his tone that bothers her. It's almost reticence, as if he thinks perhaps he crossed a line sharing his joy with her, which breaks her heart, because she spent 18 months sharing his pain and his anger and his fear. He deserves to have joy and to share it.
I'm happy for you,
she says.
Although you might want to get poor Lupin a primer. He's hardly well read on wizarding paganism marriage rites, I'm sure. 7 steps is 5 too many, for some of us.
He laughs, thin and awkwardly, but he's relaxed again, and his face is still open and happy.
Well, I do plan to ask him what sort of a wedding he'd like before springing the other 6 on him.
She's sure Sirius could suggest getting married upside down in tartan robes with bright pink hair, and Remus Lupin would offer not even a token objection. She doesn't tell him that, though. He might already know. Minerva's seen dozens of Hogwarts love stories. She's seen very few start so early and last. This one will. In their silence, Sirius plucks up one of the scrolls of parchment she dropped by his knee and flicks it open. She tamps down the urge to tell him to put it down. He reads silently for a while and curls his lip.
Your first years are dumb as trolls,
he says.
Or at least this one is. You can't ignore an entire branch of theory and come to the conclusion that you can turn a water goblet into a Kneasel simply because you can do it the other way round.
They're learning. And these are for Potter anyway. He's doing marking for his detention.
Sirius chortles out a laugh.
He's going to hate himself by the end. Swear off fighting forever.
He cocks his head to the side.
Are you making Mooney do marking too?
I was planning on it. Between the two of them, they might finish them for me.
Rotten luck, that's not a punishment. He'll enjoy it.
That gives her pause.
Why?
He's been doing tutoring for years. He sets papers sometimes.
Papers?
She echoes.
I thought everyone knew, honestly. He's got a whole gaggle of starry-eyed third years. They call him Professor Lupin sometimes. It's hysterical.
She raises an eyebrow at him and takes the scroll out of his hand.
I didn't,
she says faintly.
Lupin's been teaching.
He charges 3 sickles an hour.
Sirius grins at her.
I keep telling him he's undercharging, but he doesn't listen.
The spark of a thought begins to grow in the back of her head.
He is.
She agrees. She makes it to Thursday before she breathes life into the idea. She'll need allies in this, lots of them, and preferably powerful ones. Other people with Albus's ear, and people who don't mind a change. Of course, there's field research to do. She corners Kelvin Landry on Tuesday, since Landry is the easiest target of the Gryffindor thirds. She knows her students. He folds immediately, and he tells her everything she needs to know. Lupin does tutor. He does indeed charge a criminally low 3 sickles an hour, and he thinks Professor Binns is a rotten history of magic professor. She agrees with that. He seems to, according to Landry, indiscriminately offer tutelage to anyone on anything, so long as they pay up and put in the work. Apparently, there's even a group of third-year Hufflepuffs who've gone to him about divination, which is a class Remus Lupin has never taken. She knows that because she's his head of house and approved his schedule, but even if she weren't, she'd know it from the absolute screaming fight he'd had with Black, who'd picked divination on the assumption Lupin would, in the middle of the Great Hall on the first day of third year. Minerva assumes all of his knowledge of the topic comes from listening to Sirius grumble for the 3 years he took the subject. She'd only been subjected to the last 9 months of him pretending to divine fortunes from tarot cards. It had been excruciating to listen to. Minerva doesn't have time to dwell in the past, though, when she's got the present and the future on her mind. She spends Wednesday arguing with most of the Newt's level 7ths about the ethics of human transfiguration, which she takes quite personally, as someone who's transfigured her human self to sometimes be a cat. The 4th-year Gryffindor and Hufflepuff class she has in the afternoon is practically a walk in the park in comparison. Wednesday is one of her triple days, and the first years take back their papers, graded by an increasingly annoyed Potter, the Gryffindor set, and a rather more sedate Lupin, who handled the Slytherins. On Thursday she breathes because it's fifths all day and they're deep in Owl review. She sets the Ravenclaw and Slytherin block to review 3 chapters and pulls Lacey Bilgeflower to the side. She was a hat stall and proud of it. She chose Slytherin when the hat couldn't decide for her, but she got on with the Ravenclaws. Minerva has a soft spot for almost Ravenclaws, having been one herself so many years ago. Bilgeflower hasn't gone to Lupin for tutoring, but she knows 3 Ravenclaw fifths who swear by his history methods. She says things like critical lens and historical context, and the plan begins to solidify in her head. She needs Filius. She needs Pomona. She doesn't need Horace because he's useless, actually. He has Albus's ear insofar as Albus likes a brandy, and Horace usually has brandy on hand. She waits in the staff common room after dinner for one of them to float through. They usually all do, at some point in the evening before lights out. She's twitchy, thinking about it. She's been worrying this particular problem in her head for years, but it's gotten worse since Lupin skipped his career counseling last year. She'd asked him why. He looked at her, dead-eyed, and said, "I didn't want to waste your time." Minerva had gone back to her room and had a little cry. The worst part of it had been that he was right. Filius wanders in with the prophet under his arm, humming. He takes one look at her in one of the chairs by the fire and climbs up into the one across from her.
"You're up to something,"
he says. She looks over at him.
"I've had an idea,"
she says.
"And I've got a plan."
He sets the paper on the table beside his chair and puts his full attention on her.
"Oh."
"Binns is useless."
She lowers her voice and peers around. The only other person in the room is Vector, who has no feelings on any of this. Still, she's not ready to make this known yet. There's still so much work to do on the back end. They've got a full year, and she thinks she'll need all of it.
"Well, yes."
He agrees.
"He knows the material, but only because the material hasn't changed in 150 years. My students call it nap time."
Mine do too. No one takes it seriously. Half the students don't even try for the newt.
"Well, it's history of magic, Minerva. It's not the most scintillating class available."
She gives him a look she hopes is meaningful.
It could be Filius.
"What, do you want Albus to sack Binns?"
Yes, along with Horace, but that's hardly what I'm getting at.
She huffs and leans forward.
What would you think of expanding the history department?
"History?"
He asks, eyebrows quirking.
"History,"
she confirms.
"An added elective, perhaps, or a different instructor for the upper years."
Have you suddenly found yourself with an interest and an abundance of spare time?
She shakes her head, a grin spreading across her face. This feels like conspiring.
Not me, Phileas, Remus Lupin.
Chapter 11, Sirius.
I've done it.
Sirius shouts on Friday evening. He's standing on the staircase to the boys' dormitories, hanging out of the archway and leaning into the common room. Prongs looks up from where he's sat by the fireplace with Evans curled up next to him.
Done what?
Sirius narrows his eyes. He's not shouting about it across the common room.
Haven't you already been doing it for ages?
Peter pipes up from somewhere behind a planter. Sirius would hex him if he could see him. The ficus is the only thing saving Wormtail from boils.
I've done that too, you prick. Just this morning, I'll tell you all about it if you'd like. Not that, Pettigrew. The project.
James sits up straight.
The extracurricular.
Yes.
Sirius cuts him off. They've named it. The extracurricular cartography project is done. But he's not shouting about the Marauders map either.
I'd like to properly finish, but it seems weird doing it alone.
Peter sniggers. Sirius throws a hex at the ficus anyway, even if the plant didn't deserve it. Wormtail does, and Wormtail likes plants. He'll feel bad about the hex either way, which was the end goal. James carefully pulls himself away from Evans.
You've sorted out the issue you were having with the wand work.
All sorted.
Sirius says.
The practice try went well.
James's eyes light up. Peter peeks up from behind the planter.
It's time then.
James says. He kisses Evans on the cheek and jumps to his feet.
Lads, it's time.
Yes.
Sirius says impatiently.
It's bloody time. Let's get this done.
He races back upstairs. He knows the others are behind him. He can hear their feet on the stairs. He pushes open the door, and Mooney looks up from his desk, where the Marauders map is unfurled, still static and blank. Hunky-dory's spinning on the phonograph. Mooney looks up at him and grins.
This is going to work.
He says.
Yep.
Sirius agrees. He leans over the map, looking at the careful lines Mooney painstakingly copied from notes on scraps of parchment, and sometimes on the backs of their hands or their arms, or wherever they could draw the hundreds of rooms and hallways they spent years discovering. James and Peter both come bursting through the door.
The time is now, gentle wizards.
James says. He claps his hands.
This is our life's work.
Well, I certainly hope it isn't that.
Peter says.
But it's impressive.
James gives him a glare.
Life's work, Pettigrew. There's nothing else. We've peaked.
Sirius laughs softly. He lifts his wand up. They haven't peaked. He knows that. There's ages of life left, and he plans to use his as best he can. This is still an impressive feat. Even just the static, lifeless map hasn't ever been done before. He twists his arm in a complicated hexagonal and mutters a series of charms under his breath that he's been working on for 2 bloody weeks. He focuses on footprints, on the map, on wanting to know where everyone is, because intention matters almost as much as incantation. The map glows white, which is good, and when the light fades, there's hundreds of tiny banners on top of inky footprints. Poppy Pomfrey is there, in her office. Albus Dumbledore down in the kitchens. Lily Evans out in the common room. Regulus Black in the Slytherin Fifth's dormitory. He grins. He looks up at Mooney, and then back at Prongs and Wormtail behind him. They're there on the map, too, the 4 of them clustered together in the Gryffindor Sixth's dorm.
It worked.
James says reverent.
We've got a map.
Should have thought of a way to turn it off.
Peter muses. Remus glances at him over his shoulder, a fond grin on his face.
One step ahead of you this time, Wormtail.
He says, pressing the tip of his wand against the paper.
Goodbye.
2 years of hard work disappears into the parchment, leaving it blank. James gapes.
Put it back.
He shouts.
Where'd it go?
Sirius sighs. Remus rolls his eyes.
It's not gone.
Sirius tells him.
Just hidden, here.
He moves and pushes James into the spot in front of the map.
If you tap it and say the passphrase, it'll come back. It's just the charm girls use on their diaries.
What's the passphrase?
Prongs has 3 brain cells and 2 of them are dead.
James glares at him.
If that's actually it, we're changing it.
It's hello for now. We just set the charm we thought we'd pick together.
Sirius grins at him, big and happy, because it's over, it's done, and it mightn't be their life's work, but it's certainly a life's work. James still looks suspicious, but he taps his wand against the parchment and mutters hello under his breath. The ink blooms out from his wand tip, spiraling and twisting back to its new, living glory.
All right,
He says, satisfied.
but we're working on this passphrase. Hello and goodbye aren't befitting of the mischief makers.
Remus looks at Sirius. Sirius nods at him.
About that,
Remus says, turning in his chair to face the rest of them.
I have an idea.
They spend the bulk of the night in the dorm together, watching the map. Sirius is unreasonably obsessed with it. When they'd had the thought, he hadn't thought they'd really have much use for it outside of general mischief, but there's things to be learned. Dumbledore likes to wander the upper floors. Filch has a pattern that's already emerging after just a few hours of watching him. The Ravenclaw prefects patrol in ever-widening circles, which will be almost too easy to time out if they ever want to cause trouble in Ravenclaw Tower. It's also a laugh, because Gryffindors don't even bother to patrol half the time. Jacob Golden, the head boy, seems to be having an illicit affair with Ralph Burke, which is interesting and possibly useful, because the next time he tries to shout at Sirius for something, Sirius will have absolutely zero qualms about telling his girlfriend about it, and he'll have absolutely zero guilt about it either. Cheating is despicable. McGonagall's spending her evening with Flitwick and Sprout. They're cloistered in Flitwick's office, their 3 sets of footprints static but together. He wonders what they talk about, and if they do this a lot, and what McGonagall's actual life is like. He spent so much time with her last year, Thursday after Thursday, where he spilled his guts at her, but he doesn't know anything about her. That feels unequal, unfair. He wonders if McGonagall has ever been in love. He wonders if she's got a best friend. He wonders if she's ever felt so profoundly awful she thought she'd make everything better by dying. He hopes not. But he wonders because no adult ever cared that he was drowning before she did. He supposes that isn't fair to Mum and Dad, who clearly loved him even back then, but he didn't know. He wasn't theirs yet. He is now, and Euphemia and Fleamont Potter's love fills him up in a way he didn't know he was missing. It's different from all the other kinds of love he's found. And he's found so much. He's so lucky. Remus, James, Peter, Mum and Dad, Aunt Doria and Uncle Charles, Andromeda, even. She signs her letters love, Andy, with a little heart. Mooney swapped off Bowie for the White Album, which was always going to happen. It's familiar noise, even if it isn't his favorite. Sirius leans back against the bed and thinks about April and all its awfulness. Sunday is Beltane, May Day, the start of something fresh. There's a full-on Tuesday, which means tomorrow is Remus's last day before the pain comes. Sirius thinks he might speak to Hooch about planning next year's games better. Or maybe he'll quit the team. He's been threatening for ages. He's got Newts to worry about, and Oxmag, and planning a hand fasting. They've got to find Mooney a job. They've got to get a house, because he can't live with Mum and Dad forever, and he wants to start his life with Remus properly. He lolls his head back against the bed. Mooney peers down at him from where he sprawled sideways across the mattress, a thoughtful look on his face.
You need a shave,
he says, which makes Sirius laugh, because he looks so serious about it. He scrubs at his own face. He's a bit stubbly, he supposes.
Maybe I'm trying to grow it.
Mooney scrunches his nose up.
Don't. I like you without.
You'd like me with?
That pulls a smile out of him.
I would, but I'd miss seeing your whole face.
Sirius tries to picture himself with a beard. He thinks he'd just look like Orion, which makes him slightly nauseous. He thinks about Mooney's pirate novels and of Blackbeard. He'd be a marauder if he were to be anything but himself, Blackbeard himself. That would be all right. He thinks about the other ways he might be something other than himself. Choices matter.
Do you think you would have liked me if we weren't in the same house?
He asks. Remus scoots over on the bed and rests his chin on top of Sirius's head.
You know I would have.
It might have taken us longer to find each other.
Sirius doesn't say his worst fear, which is that they might never have.
I liked you in line for the Sorting Hat.
Remus tells him.
You called Rosier pusillanimous right before you were called, and I thought I ought to be friends with him.
Sirius grins. He's glad one of them remembers.
He still is the bastard.
Remus laughs softly. He winds his arms loosely around Sirius's neck and presses his open palm over his heart.
This is for me. I would have found you. Doesn't matter what colour your tie is.
Sirius glances back at the map, at Sirius Black and Remus Lupin so close together their tiny banners are almost intertwined. He hopes that's true, but it doesn't matter. The past already happened and can't be changed, no matter how much he wishes he could change some of it. What matters is the love they've built together and the future stretching out in front of them. James sighs loudly and throws a pillow at them.
We get it.
He grumbles at them.
You're eternal soulmates, destined for each other by the bloody stars. We've read the sonnets. I want to play Exploding Snap now.
Saturday dawns too early because of Quidditch, and with it comes Remus's itchy calf and the start of a headache that'll get worse as the day drags on until he wakes up on Sunday morning feeling as though he's been trampled by a dragon. Sirius knows the ebb and flow of the moon cycle better than he knows almost anything else nowadays. He gives Remus a vial of pain potion with his morning tea and spends 5 minutes gently scratching at the bite mark on the back of his calf, even though he knows it'll do nothing to stop the itch. This is the last good day, and he's going to spend it playing bloody Quidditch. Tomorrow, Mooney's head will be splitting, and by the time they leave Runes on Monday afternoon, he'll need to stop halfway up the stairs to catch his breath. Sirius normally feels better about this. He's normally a good sport. The cycle is part of Mooney, and he loves all of Mooney. So much of the last month was spent being bloody miserable, though, and he feels as though he's been cheated out of time. He doesn't want to go play Quidditch, is the point, when he could spend hours laying around with Mooney, enjoying themselves. James would throttle him, though, and besides, Remus will be back to full strength soon enough, and May will spread out in front of them, open and free. He's got plans for May. They're boring plans, but he intends to muck about with his fiancée and his friends and be general menaces upon wizarding society while they still can. This, he imagines, is a hard lesson for the rest of his life. He's going to have to do things on the last good day. He's not always going to be able to lay around and pepper Mooney with kisses and bring him tea and slyly convince him to let Sirius suck him off. Adult things will get in the way. A job, eventually. Life. Today, though, it's Quidditch in the way, which does not feel like a good enough reason to abandon the idea of blowjobs. The game against Slytherin is always a bitter game, more so since Regulus joined the team 2 years ago. And this year, it's going to be a particularly terrible game, since Regulus will shake James's hand on the field with Sirius standing behind him, and that feels strange, awful, and unfun. Sirius loves Regulus. It's complicated. He spent almost 14 years watching over that twerpy little shit, and he is a little shit, that much has always been clear, even when they were both little. It got worse when Sirius got called for Gryffindor, and worse still when Regulus went to Slytherin. Natural enemies, some would say, but they aren't. Reg always did know how to poke him where it hurts, though. Walburga didn't help, always making everything a competition between the two of them. And Orion didn't help either, with his scathing remarks about Sirius's friends, and how it was going to be hard to find him a match, and how Regulus would have been a much more fitting heir to the name. Well, Sirius supposes Orion got what he wanted in the end, and that's all right. He got Mooney and the Potters and Peter and Evans too. He'll never regret leaving. He still loves his brother, though. He'd still jump in front of a curse for him. He doesn't want to stand behind James's shoulder while James tries to crush Regulus's hand and then crush his spirit on the Quidditch pitch. The whole thing feels uncomfortably symbolic.
If you think any harder, I think your brain will start smoking,
Remus says to him. It pulls him up out of his thoughts. He looks across at him, where Mooney sprawled on his side, letting Sirius fruitlessly try to get his calf to stop itching for the 50th time.
Quidditch,
he says.
Ah.
Remus raises his head up to peer at him through his fringe.
Regulus.
Sirius frowns.
Regulus.
He admits.
I might tell James to play Feldletter.
Marlene will knock him off his broom.
That's true. Sirius laughs. It comes out more bitter than he intends.
And then Prongs will kill me, which would solve all my problems in one fell swoop.
Mooney flinches.
Don't joke about that.
Sorry.
Sirius hurries out.
Truly, I wasn't trying to. I'm sorry.
He squeezes Mooney's leg.
I fuck.
Remus pulls himself up to sitting and Sirius meets him halfway, so they're face to face. Remus tugs on a curl, which at the moment is the least sexy it's ever been, and that makes Sirius strangely sad.
It's all right. Lately, I'm just...
Remus waves a hand in the air.
I know. I should have been. I should know better.
Sirius sighs and leans forward to press his forehead against Remus's. He feels like a twat. It'll never be a joke to Mooney, rightfully so. For Sirius, it's easy. It's nothing. He was unconscious. He can't remember, even if he wanted to. Remus can't forget, even if he never talks about it.
If you really don't want to play, Sirius, don't play.
Remus's hand comes to a rest on his neck, thumb against the hinge of his jaw.
Prongs will be upset, but he'll get over it.
I'll feel like a quitter.
Sirius sighs.
I just don't want to have to deal with whatever brother versus brother prick measuring contest is about to happen to me.
I'm sure it will be a thriller from the stands.
Remus says.
And if Hammerhead is quick, my head might still feel right enough to reward you for a game well played.
Sirius grins, then steals a kiss.
Up Gryffindor, then, if there's a reward on the line.
Chapter 12, Regulus. Regulus stays low during matches. He's always done because other seekers stay high and he's a contrary fucker, but also because the snitch doesn't follow anyone's rules. More than once, he's caught it in the middle of a scramble over the quaffle. Hammerhead stays high, so he stays low, down in the muck. It helps him control the chaos too, because Rosier and Crouch are feeling mean today. He's already had to deal with 4 foul shots because Crouch keeps trying to bean McKinnon with the bat, as though her head's a bludger. He can't stand that sort of play. Working through loopholes is one thing. Brazenly fouling the other team is something else entirely. They're down 60 to 150. He needs the snitch to appear, and quick, because Hammerhead is scanning the sky above him, and they've gotten to the point where even he can't save the game if Gryffindor scores again. The spread matters. They need to win by 60 to take the cup, but at this point, he's willing to lose the cup just to knock the smug look off James Potter's face by winning the match. What's between them isn't a single match. It's a long game that Regulus intends on winning. He hears Sirius shout behind him, and Regulus spins his broom, swearing under his breath because there's fucking Crouch again, this time trying to turn Sirius's brains into paste.
Crouch,
he shouts, ducking under Metalthroop. He's losing what little patience he has. Hooch calls the foul. Potter takes it and hits it. Center hoop, which is embarrassing. He's going to throw Crouch off the team, and then when he's done, he's going to throw Caro off the team for missing a center hoop foul. He shouts to Ross to score a fucking goal, because if he finds the snitch now and they lose the cup over a foul that shouldn't have happened, he'll kill them all in their sleep. A bludger comes screaming past his head, courtesy of Sirius, and he has to stop himself from snarling at him. This game is a mess. Rosier cracks a bludger wide. It shoots past McKinnon, over Ross's head, and a bolt of white light from the stands slams into it with a crack. The bludger veers left, hard, gaining speed as it rockets across the pitch, past Regulus's head, and then swings impossibly up, crunching hard against James Potter's skull. His broom slips out from between his legs, and James Potter, Gryffindor darling, falls from the sky. There's a split-second moment where Regulus has a terrible, perfect thought that his 6 years of torture have finally ended, before he realizes what will happen if James Potter dies today, and he's shooting down in a spiral dive, a blur of silver and green, reaching out with both hands to grab stupid James Potter by the armpits. He wrenches him up hard as he tries to break, but the pitch is coming up quick and they're running out of room. He skids them to a stop mere feet above the grass. Potter's unconscious, bleeding from the head, but he's alive. Regulus did not save James Potter because it's the right thing to do. It is also that, and an annoying part of his brain that he sometimes refers to as Sirius when he's in a foul mood keeps reminding him of that. But that isn't why he did it. His reasons are ultimately more selfish than that. Sirius, the real one, his brother, he's the reason. If James Potter were to become a splat on a Quidditch pitch, Sirius would spin out. He'd lose his mind. He needs his public reasons, though, and he has them. It's unsportsmanlike. Regulus isn't a cheater. Cheating is inelegant. Cheating is for losers, and he is not a loser. Although he's about to be now, because he's very angry at both Rosier and his accomplice in the stands, is clutching an unconscious James Potter, and is seconds away from having Sirius possibly kill him for something he had nothing to do with. Hooch and Sirius hit the grass at the same instant. Sirius almost tumbles off his broom, dashing toward them, face bloodless and eyes wide.
What the fuck happened?
He shouts as he slides to a stop in front of Regulus.
Rosier and I assume an accomplice.
Regulus grits out. Potter's bleeding on him. He's breathing, though. Regulus looks up at Hooch.
Disqualify us,
he orders. He lets Sirius take Potter from him and lay him out in the grass. Sirius casts a dozen spells so fast, Regulus can't make out the incantations. She blinks at him.
Bludgers are.
Disqualify us now.
Regulus feels himself getting angrier, but he forces himself to squash it down.
A bludger hit is fair play.
Hooch says.
Fine.
Regulus snaps easily.
Then Slytherin will play without a seeker or beaters, because I'm benching Crouch and Rosier, and I won't put in the second string. That wasn't a fair hit. That bludger was tampered with. I saw it with my own eyes. Disqualify us now.
Pomfrey comes running across the field, robes flapping behind her. Sirius is still trying to staunch the bleeding from Potter's fucking head wound, and if Hooch doesn't disqualify them, Regulus will stand there on the pitch until Hammerhead catches the snitch and the game gets called anyway. He will. Hooch looks between Potter and Sirius and him, then blows her whistle.
Black, who can call your team off.
She asks, and it takes him a moment to realize she's talking to Sirius, not him. Because without Potter, Gryffindor is probably his team. And that's fucking useless, because there's no way he's going to extract himself from James Potter's arsehole long enough to call off Gryffindor. He's also covered in blood now, and it's possible he's crying. Regulus can't see. Pomfrey skids to a stop next to him. Regulus feels better for that. Sirius is probably competent, but he's also emotionally entangled. There's no way he's thinking with his whole brain. Hooch is back up in the sky, whistling to call off the game. The Gryffindors drop fast. McKinnon lands behind Sirius, frantic and shouting. Hammerhead swoops down behind them, and Gilbert, Metalthroop, and Howell aren't far behind. They cluster together, peering at their downed captain and his lieutenant on the grass. There's shouting Regulus can't make out because of all the crosstalk. Pomfrey tries to shoo them. It doesn't work. Regulus didn't think it would. He's got a creeping feeling that the Gryffindor Quidditch team is going to be a wall around James Potter for a very long time. His own team lands behind him. He doesn't want to turn to face them because he may do something he regrets if he looks at them now. He's a hero. He saved the life of the boy who ruined his, and that's fucking Rosier's fault. Regulus will never forgive him for that. Sirius runs off with Pomfrey, of course, with the whole Quidditch team trailing after him and Lupin and Pettigrew not far behind. They leave Regulus standing on the field, furiously shaking, standing in front of the other 6 Slytherins. He's got James Potter's blood on his neck, drying sticky and uncomfortable.
I could kill you all.
Regulus says quietly. They're all listening. He doesn't need to shout.
You've cost us the cup, and worse, you've cost us our reputations.
Rosier looks like he wants to try and speak, but Regulus squashes that with a glare that would make Father proud.
I can't believe Hooch disqualified us.
Ross mutters. For a moment, Regulus considers the truth, but he knows that would be the end of his captaincy and the end of his reign as the king of the dungeon.
I can't believe you think she wouldn't.
He settles on.
She saw the jinx on the bludger. Any fool with eyeballs could see the jinx on the bludger. I've said it time and time again, we do not cheat. This is what happens.
But
nothing.
Regulus snarls.
I've got Gryffindor blood on my robes because you couldn't sort out how to properly skirt the rules. I've got to go explain your misbehaviour to Hooch. I've got to live the rest of my bloody life knowing that I've lost a match because of you, Rosier.
Rosier pales.
Reg.
No.
Regulus slashes his hand through the air.
You're fired, Rosier. I'd rather have no beaters at all than play another match with you. They expect us to cheat. We can't give them what they expect.
He looks to the rest of the team.
I won't forget this by September. Sort yourselves out. Next year we play to win, and we'll take the cup from their smug hands. But we'll do it right.
There's murmurs amongst them. He doesn't care if they all quit. At this rate, he'd rather play with the second string. At least they'd listen and be grateful.
Showers,
he orders.
And then I don't want to see a single one of you until I absolutely have to.
He follows after them. He showers. He washes Potter's blood off his neck and furiously casts cleaning charms on his robes. He tries not to think of Sirius's pale face and shaking hands. He doesn't want to think about how Sirius half turned toward him with tears on his cheeks before he went chasing after Pomfrey. Regulus didn't save James Potter for Potter's sake. He dresses, ignoring the others. He leaves the locker room. He goes back up to the castle. He doesn't go back to the dungeons. There'll be sore feelings all over the common room, and there's another matter he needs to see to first anyway. So he makes his way up instead of down and stands awkwardly in front of the doors to the hospital wing for a long while. Slytherins, by and large, are not known for their nerve. He takes time to gather his will to push the door open. The ward isn't full of Gryffindor red and gold. It smells like cloves and antiseptic potions. Potter's on a bed near the fire. Lupin and Pettigrew are standing at the end of the bed, craning over it. Sirius is sat on the edge, holding his wand to Potter's head. Pomfrey hovers behind him, her hands on his shoulders. It's Pettigrew who notices him first. He elbows Lupin, who turns and stares at him, slack-jawed for a moment before he breaks away and comes over to him.
Thank you,
He says in a rush.
You saved his life.
Regulus doesn't think he's ever actually spoken directly to his brother's lover. It's curious that this would be the first time that saving his sworn enemy's life would be the thing.
Someone had to.
Regulus settles on. He feels uncomfortable in heroism. It isn't his natural state.
Well, it was you, and we're thankful.
Lupin says. It takes Regulus a moment to realize Lupin speaking on behalf of his brother, that he and Lupin are the we that's grateful. Lupin reaches up to push his hair out of his face, and Regulus sees it, the glint of gold on Lupin's right hand, and he has to stuff down the urge to shout. A proper engagement, then. Not any of that muggle business. He wonders when that happened. He wonders where he got the gold. Of course, Sirius didn't bother to ask him, his brother. Fleamont, probably, the bloody usurper. He'll have time to be angry about that later. He's gotten what he needed anyway, which is seeing Potter alive. He goes to turn and leave, but he's spun around roughly and tugged into a hug. Sirius is there, smelling of lemons. Some things will never change, and he's hugging him, which makes the whole thing worth it.
Reg.
He sobs into his shoulder.
Thank you.
He squeezes Sirius back harder than he probably should. He misses this more than he would ever admit out loud.
Of course, brother.
He says into his shoulder.
Anything for you, always. Happy Beltane, Potter?
Regulus drawls when Potter finally opens his eyes in the dead of the night. He slides his glasses onto his face. He wants Potter to be able to see him when he ruins his life.
How's your head?
Potter makes a sound like a dying Krupp, which is apt, Regulus supposes. It's embarrassing that Sirius would rather call that brother than him.
I saved your life yesterday.
Regulus says.
I'm a loser but a hero. It's all very Gryffindor, so I'm sure you know how I feel.
He leans over the side of the bed again, narrowed eyes meeting Potter's glassy ones.
Sirius says you're all put back together. No harm, no foul.
Potter blinks at him.
You caught me.
He says, it's not a question.
5 points to Gryffindor.
Regulus smiles meanly. He and Sirius are remarkably similar looking. He's sure it's strange to Potter to look up at him and see something other than affection in such a familiar face. Especially here, where Sirius has been swanning around, healing skinned knees and patching up third years after fights.
Why?
Potter asks around a groan as he struggles to sit up. Regulus considers his answer. There's several reasons, but only one that matters. He opts for honesty because Potter will understand that.
My brother is annoyingly fond of you. I mean that. It annoys me that he's fond of you. But Sirius would be. Unreasonable if you died. I was close enough to catch you. It wasn't for you, to be clear.
Potter still has a glazed look about him, but Regulus doesn't particularly care. He's got precious little time until Sirius comes back from checking on his lover. The full moon's on Tuesday. Regulus has been reading. He knows Lupin's probably in pain already.
Well, thanks anyway, I suppose.
Potter says. He rubs at his eyes under his glasses.
I mean, I'm alive thanks to you.
Correct.
Regulus says.
And that brings us the matter of your debt.
Potter pales, which is good sense. A life debt isn't a joke. Regulus could keep it and use it later, ruin James Potter's smug brother-stealing life. He won't, but he could. He's using it now. Potter has something he needs.
My debt.
Potter's nostrils flare.
I won't hurt anyone, Regulus. I won't. I'm not going to break Sirius and Remus up, either.
Regulus rolls his eyes.
You're unoriginal and cliché.
He tells him.
My brother can keep his lover. He's happier than he was without him. Even a blind man can see that.
He knows this is a matter they agree on, the two of them.
Well, yes.
Potter frowns as though agreeing with Regulus is the worst thing that's ever happened to him.
They're getting married.
I was present for the engagement dinner, you screaming moron.
Regulus can't stop himself from glaring.
I saw the ring. He didn't ask me for gold. Your father's, I assume.
His father too, since yours is a twat.
Potter snaps back, and there it is. Potter's quick and mean when he wants to be. The dope he put on is almost as grating as Sirius's. Nothing is as grating as Sirius's. Regulus spent nearly a decade with Sirius before he took off for Hogwarts and convinced the Sorting Hat to put him with the first person he met on the train, which was this idiot in front of him. Sirius wasn't meant for Gryffindor. He still isn't, even after 6 years in their thrall. That's not who he is. He's Sirius Black, Regulus's big brother, the smartest, best person Regulus has ever known, the only person who knows all of Regulus's secrets, the boy who spent weeks upon weeks in their father's library, curled up with books bigger than him, and read aloud to Regulus sometimes when he asked, the one who would patiently help Regulus with his lessons. The one who fought with Mother so Regulus didn't have to, dodging glass shards while Regulus hid under his bed. That's Sirius. He sees flashes of him sometimes when he's watching him, especially when he's alone with Lupin. He knows his brother is still in there, hiding away. And Regulus wants him back.
I demand payment of your debt to me.
Regulus says,
You'll tell no one of the terms, you'll tell no one that I called for payment.
I agree.
Potter grits out, because he has to, but it still feels nice to be agreed with. Regulus smiles serenely. He's glad he thought to put the glasses back on Potter's face.
Give me my brother back.
He says, Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic composed by Burning Aurora, Kaliana, and Flowerhawk.